Hello, curious minds, and welcome to Documentary for Sleep. If you found your way here tonight, maybe it's because your thoughts won't quite settle, or maybe you're just looking for a calm voice to drift off to. Either way, you're in good company. Whether you're lying in bed, easing yourself towards sleep, or letting this play quietly in the background while you cook, work, or shower, this is your moment to slow down and let your mind wander backward. Tonight, we're not chasing fantasy, but exploring the science of memory. Why humans can hold on to long-term stories, skills, and faces for decades, yet forget tiny details like where they left their keys or what they had for breakfast yesterday. This is soft science, grounded in psychology, neuroscience, and the quiet mysteries of how the brain evolved to remember and to forget. We don't have all the answers, but we do have the experiments, the patterns, and the questions. And if you happen to drift off while listening, that's perfectly fine. I've left full timestamps in the description so you can find your place tomorrow, because this journey from beginning to end is worth hearing. And if this kind of calm, long-form storytelling helps you learn, focus, or just find rest after a noisy day, consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps this quiet corner of soft science reach more curious sapiens like you. And I'd love to hear from you. When do you listen? Is it at night before sleep, on a quiet shift, or in a small break between the busyness of your day? And as always, stay curious, stay calm. You step into the cafe, the murmur of conversation a soft hum against the clinking of cups. Your eyes scan the room and then stop. There, by the window, is a face you know. The features are immediately, undeniably familiar. The curve of the smile, the specific way their eyes crinkle. A name, however, remains stubbornly out of reach, a ghost on the tip of your tongue. It's a peculiar frustration, this mental short circuit. Meanwhile, you can recall with startling clarity the exact words of a graduation speech delivered a decade ago. Why does the brain, this magnificent organ, fail at such a simple modern task while hoarding seemingly trivial details from the distant past? The answer begins not in a failure of memory, but in a triumph of evolution. The human brain does not process a face and a name with the same neural machinery. When you see that familiar face, a specialized region deep within the temporal lobe, the fusiform gyrus, flickers to life. This is an ancient piece of our hardware, a system honed over millions of years to perform the most critical of social calculations. Friend or foe? It is a rapid assessment tool, optimized for recognizing the subtle configurations of eyes, nose, and mouth that signaled safety or danger in the dense social landscapes of our ancestors. A name, by stark contrast, is a recent and arbitrary invention. It carries no survival weight in its syllables. It is a piece of data, a tag attached long after the primal recognition has occurred. The brain, in its efficient design, prioritizes the signal that once meant the difference between life and death over the modern social convention. We can trace this preference back to the very cradle of our species. For the vast majority of human history, Homo sapiens lived in small, tight-knit bands of perhaps 50 to 150 individuals. In such a world, every face was a chapter in the story of your survival. You needed to remember who shared their food, who was a skilled hunter, who harbored a grudge. Recognition was the glue of the community, the foundation of trust and cooperation. Language itself was a relatively late development in our evolutionary journey, and names were merely a convenient tool layered on top of this deeply ingrained facial recognition system. They were labels for identities already cemented by sight, by smell, by shared experience. The face was the book. The name was just the title. Now, thrust into the blinding speed of the modern world, this exquisitely adapted system is overwhelmed. We are expected to navigate a social universe of staggering scale. In a single week, we might exchange pleasantries with dozens of colleagues, glance at hundreds of profile pictures on social media, and sit in a Zoom meeting mosaic of unfamiliar faces. Our brains are bombarded with a torrent of visual and nominal information, far exceeding the social cataloging capacity they were built for. Without the rich context of a shared life, the emotional weight of a conflict, the warmth of a long collaboration, the scent of a particular place. The neural glue that binds a face to a name often fails to set. The face is recognized by the ancient fusiform gyrus, but the name, a flimsy piece of data, slips through the cracks of a system straining under a cognitive load it never evolved to carry. And yet, a counterpoint emerges. There are those remarkable individuals who can remember the names of hundreds of acquaintances with effortless grace. Does this not contradict the idea of a brain with inherent limitations? Perhaps it suggests that our memory is not a fixed vessel, but a malleable skill, that these individuals have simply learned to apply conscious effort to a process that for most of us remains subconscious. Or could it be that their brains have forged stronger connections, turning the arbitrary name into something more meaningful, more story-like? This exception does not disprove the rule, but rather highlights the fascinating plasticity of the human mind, a system that can, at times, be trained to overcome its own ancient wiring. So, to understand this selective forgetfulness, we must first understand that the brain was not designed for perfect recall. It was designed for survival. Its priorities are not our priorities. Its logic is the pragmatic logic of the savannah, not the social etiquette of the coffee shop. It remembers what mattered for millennia, often at the expense of what matters today. But if the brain isn't simply recording everything it sees, how does it decide what is worth keeping? The memory of a face is not a photograph, and the memory of a speech is not an audio file. If the brain is not a camera, then what, precisely, is it doing in the quiet dark of our skulls each night? Is it archiving reality? Or is it perhaps something more akin to a storyteller, weaving the scattered threads of experience into a narrative we can call a life? You remember your first day of school, the specific, almost aggressive red of your new backpack, the stifled sniffle of the child beside you, a sound of pure New World terror, the firm, final pressure of your mother's hand letting go. This memory feels like a film clip, a perfect, unalterable record. But it is not. That red backpack might have been blue. The crying child might have been you. The memory is not a file to be retrieved. It is a story your brain tells, and with each telling, the details shift, the colors change, the emphasis lands on a different character. The brain does not record. It narrates. This narration begins not as a flaw, but as a feature of our biology. The human brain did not evolve to be a perfect archivist. Its primary mandate is survival, not historical accuracy. Unlike a camera's sensor, which captures photons with indifferent precision, the brain absorbs an experience and immediately begins the work of reconstruction. It prioritizes the emotional temperature of an event, the sting of separation, the thrill of independence, over the objective facts. It weaves sensory fragments into a logical sequence, a cause and effect narrative that makes sense of the world. A snapped twig in the forest is not just a sound. It's the beginning of a story about a predator, and the brain that best remembers the meaning of that sound, the fear, the need to freeze, is the brain that lives to tell the tale. This is efficient organization for a behavioral creature, where the lesson is more vital than the literal transcript. We can see this ancient storytelling imperative etched into the deepest layers of our history, long before the written word. In hunter-gatherer societies, knowledge was not stored in libraries, but in legends. The location of a migrating herd, the poisonous berry that blooms only in a specific moon phase, the secret path to a freshwater spring. This was survival data. It was not memorized as a dry list of coordinates and dates. Instead, it was woven into the songlines of Australian Aboriginal cultures, painted into the symbolic rituals of North American tribes, or personified in the gods of ancient myths. The story of the trickster god who stole fire was not just a tale, it was a memorable container for the crucial knowledge of how to control flame. The precise details of who, when, and where were irrelevant. The enduring truth was the how and the why, preserved in a narrative cradle strong enough to carry it across generations. The memory was a map for living, not a photograph of a single moment. In our modern, information-saturated world, This same neurological machinery operates, but its consequences feel different, more disquieting. We now treat memory as evidence, relying on it in courtrooms and in the building of our personal identities. Yet, neuroscience reveals a startling truth. Every time we recall a memory, we are not playing a recording. We are rewriting the script. The act of recollection is an act of reconsolidation. The memory is taken out of storage, unfolded, and examined. In that vulnerable state, it can be subtly altered by our current emotions, by new information, by a leading question. A detail is added, a shadow is misinterpreted, a face is replaced. Then, this revised version is saved over the original. This is the engine of false memory, where we can come to vividly remember events that never happened, convinced of their truth with unshakable certainty. Our most cherished moments are not immutable facts, but living narratives, constantly edited by the present-day editor in our mind. This leads to a deeply unsettling question. If memory is so malleable, so prone to distortion and fictionalization, how can we ever truly trust our own past? How can we build a sense of self on such shifting sands? The very foundation of our identity seems to crumble under this scrutiny. Perhaps the answer lies not in seeing this fragility as a weakness, but in recognizing it as the necessary cost of a deeper strength. A perfect total recall would be a curse, an unbearable burden of irrelevant data. The brain's filtering mechanism, its tendency to forget the trivial and reshape the significant, is what allows us to navigate the present without being paralyzed by the past. It forces us to extract meaning from the noise. But this raises a more profound mystery. If the brain is so adept at filtering, what is the criteria? What invisible hand decides which moments are worthy of becoming part of our ongoing story and which are condemned to the silent void of the forgotten? Is it the intensity of the emotion, the novelty of the experience, or some deeper, more inscrutable algorithm of the self? And if forgetting the details is not a bug, but the brain's elegant solution to information overload, what other perceived flaws in our thinking are actually sophisticated features honed by evolution? Could our tendency to see patterns in randomness or to cling to first impressions be not simple errors in logic, but hidden tools for a faster, more efficient way of being? You forget where you left your keys, the exact details of last night's dinner, but you remember with perfect, painful clarity the look in your former lover's eyes on the day you parted ways. Memory is selective, capricious, a seemingly unreliable narrator of our own lives. We call this forgetfulness a flaw, a sign of a cluttered mind. But what if this is not a bug in the system? What if this is its most elegant, essential feature? Consider the brain, this 3-pound universe encased in bone. It is a ravenous organ, consuming nearly a quarter of the body's energy, despite being only 2% of its mass. It cannot afford to be a passive, high-fidelity recorder. Every sensation, every sight and sound demands a metabolic cost. To store the precise location of every coffee cup, the brand of every passing car, the minutiae of every casual conversation, would be a biological impossibility. Evolution, that ruthless and pragmatic editor, had to make a choice. It chose efficiency over exhaustiveness, utility over completeness. It designed a system that prioritizes information with survival value, letting the trivial, the position of a stationary object, the face of a stranger in a crowd, fade into the background hum of existence. The brain is not a perfect archive. It is a highly curated gallery, and the curator has a very specific set of criteria. We can trace the hand of this curator back to the savannas and forests of our deep past. For our ancestors, the world was a tapestry of imminent threats and fleeting opportunities. The crack of a twig could mean a predator. The specific bend of a tree might mark the path to a waterhole. Survival did not depend on remembering the exact number of leaves on that tree, but on remembering the meaning of the tree itself. Those early humans whose minds were cluttered with irrelevant data, the shape of every cloud, the pattern of every patch of moss, were slower to react to the stalking lion. Their attention was diluted. Over millennia, Natural selection favored the minds that could filter, that could instantly separate the signal from the noise. The anxiety you feel when you can't recall a minor detail is an ancient echo, a ghost of a time when forgetting the wrong thing could be fatal. Are we, then, simply carrying the cognitive baggage of a world we no longer inhabit? In our modern age, we live in an ecosystem of relentless information. A torrent of emails, notifications, and headlines floods our senses daily, a far cry from the sparse, significant signals of the ancestral world. Yet, our internal curator still operates with its old survivalist playbook. It continues to filter, but now the inputs are a chaotic blur. The result is a familiar dissonance. We forget the name of a person we just met, yet we can recall the lyrics to a childhood song with perfect clarity. We lose our wallet, but we remember a childhood humiliation with visceral intensity. The system is doing its job, perhaps too well, applying ancient algorithms to a modern deluge. It discards what it deems non-essential. But who is to say what is essential now? Is the brain's stubborn insistence on filtering the source of our modern feeling of being perpetually overwhelmed, yet strangely empty? There is, of course, a counterpoint. Consider the journalist who must recall a source's exact phrasing, the surgeon who remembers the intricate map of a patient's vasculacy, or the detective who pieces together a case from 1,000 fragmented details. These individuals seem to defy the brain's inherent design. Their professions demand a fidelity of memory that appears superhuman. This suggests that the brain is not a rigid, predetermined system, but a malleable one. Perhaps this forgetting is not an immutable law, but a default setting, a metabolic conservation mode that can be overridden with intense training and conscious effort. Can we, through sheer will, retrain the curator, expanding the gallery to hold more, to hold everything? Is the ability to remember the trivial a skill we have lost, or a burden we have wisely evolved to shed? To answer that, we must turn our gaze to those rare individuals who possess what we call a perfect memory, those who can recall the fabric of their lives with near total recall. They remember everything. But in their remarkable ability, we might find a surprising truth. Perhaps the gift of a perfect memory is not the blessing it seems, but a different kind of curse. What is the cost of remembering every single moment, every slight, every joy, and every mundane detail with equal and unforgetting clarity? What happens when the filter breaks and the gallery is flooded with everything without distinction? This leads us to a deeper, more fundamental question, one that lies at the heart of why we remember what we do. It forces us to consider the ultimate criteria of our internal curator. Our ancestors survived not by memorizing the landscape, but by remembering what the landscape meant. They needed to know where the water was, how to track the prey, how to recognize a friend from a foe. They did not need to remember every stone on the path. So, what is the true purpose of the filter? Is it merely to save energy? Or is it to ensure we remember only what is essential for our survival, however survival is defined in our present moment? Does our memory, in its beautiful, flawed selectivity, ultimately serve to remind us not of everything we have seen, but of what truly matters? If you have ever nearly drowned, the memory of that moment is likely seared into your mind with a terrifying clarity. The cold shock of the water, the desperate struggle for air, the blinding panic. These sensations become a permanent part of your internal archive. Yet, if you were to go for 50 ordinary, uneventful swims afterward, those experiences would blur into a single, unremarkable impression. You would be hard-pressed to recall the specific details of any one of them. This is not a failure of your mind, but rather the echo of an ancient, ruthless efficiency. Our memory is not a faithful historian documenting every event with impartial detail. It is a survivalist, a paranoid librarian curating a collection under a single stark directive: remember what is important for survival. This selective process begins in the deep, primal wiring of our biology. When faced with a life-threatening event, the body unleashes a cascade of chemicals, a hormonal symphony conducted by the sympathetic nervous system. Adrenaline floods the system, sharpening the senses and preparing the body for fight or flight. But its role extends beyond the immediate moment. It acts as a highlighter for the brain, marking the event as critically important. This chemical signal travels to the hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped region deep within the brain that is central to memory formation. Under the influence of this stress cocktail, the neurons involved in encoding the memory fire with greater intensity and synchrony. The synapses, the connections between these neurons, strengthen, etching the experience into long-term storage with extraordinary vividness. The brain, in its primal wisdom, understands that the details of a near-death encounter are not just another piece of data. They are a lesson, a potential key to avoiding a similar fate in the future. It is a biological imperative. Experiences that brush against mortality are granted priority status, stamped with a chemical "save forever" command. We can see the profound logic of this system when we look back through the long lens of history and archaeology. For our early ancestors, Homo erectus, traversing the savanna or Neanderthals enduring the ice ages, the line between life and death was drawn by memory. Remembering the location of a fresh water source was not a matter of convenience. It was the difference between hydration and dehydration. Knowing which grove of trees bore edible fruit in autumn, or which cave sheltered a pride of saber-toothed cats, was information as valuable as any tool. The mind became a map of perils and provisions, the sting of a poisonous berry, the sight of a predator's track near a watering hole, the specific configuration of stars that signaled the coming of a harsh season. These were the data points that natural selection favored. Forgetting a pleasant afternoon sunshine was inconsequential. Forgetting the path to the only known flint deposit or the warning signs of arrival. Tribe could mean extinction. The brain's tendency to prioritize negative, threatening, or highly consequential information was not a design flaw, but a finely tuned adaptation. It was a cognitive shield, forged in the relentless fires of survival. This ancient filtering strategy, however, has followed us into the radically different landscape of modern society. The same mechanism that once saved us from predators now shapes our inner emotional world. A painful social rejection, a humiliating failure at work, a moment of public embarrassment. These events often trigger a similar, if less intense, stress response. Our brain, operating on its old software, interprets the sharp sting of social pain or the anxiety of financial ruin with the same urgency as a physical threat. It diligently files these memories away, marking them as crucial for survival. This is a form of emotional optimization, a way to steer our future behavior away from potential harm. We remember the breakup that shattered us, so we might be more cautious with our heart. We remember the business venture that failed spectacularly, so we might calculate risks more carefully. The quiet, contented Tuesdays, the countless meals shared in comfortable silence, the simple joy of a walk on an ordinary day, these are the equivalent of those 50 uneventful swims. They are the background noise of a safe life, and our memory, still tuned to the frequency of imminent danger, often lets them fade. Is it any wonder, then, that our internal narrative can feel disproportionately weighted toward trauma and struggle? We are equipped with a survival filter in a world that, for many, is largely survivable. But what happens when this survival system, this vigilant guardian, becomes a tyrant? The very mechanism designed to protect us can turn into a source of immense suffering. For individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, the brain's alarm system fails to reset. The traumatic memory is not filed away as a painful lesson from the past. It remains a vivid, ever-present reality. The sound of a car backfiring can instantly transport a veteran back to a firefight. A certain smell can trigger the full physiological panic of a past assault in a survivor. In these cases, the memory is no longer a protective guide but a relentless tormentor, causing anxiety, hypervigilance, and debilitating flashbacks. The filter is clogged, allowing one terrifying event to dominate the entire landscape of the mind. Even for those without a clinical diagnosis, the accumulation of negatively charged memories can cast a long shadow. A predisposition to ruminate on failures, to anticipate the worst, to be haunted by past criticisms, Are these not also a maladaptive overuse of an ancient tool? The club that once fended off wolves becomes a heavy weight we cannot put down. The system that evolved to keep us safe from clear and present physical dangers is ill-equipped to handle the chronic low-grade stressors and complex psychological wounds of modern existence. Where, then, is the line between a memory that protects and a memory that wounds? To even begin to trace that boundary, we must look closer at the alchemy of memory consolidation, the mysterious process by which a fleeting moment is transformed into a lasting part of us. What truly decides if a memory is granted permanence? Is it solely the intensity of the emotion, the brute force of a survival signal? Or is there a more nuanced curation at play, one that involves not just the fear of death, but the patterns of a life lived long, long ago? Perhaps the answer lies not only in the chemistry of a single brain, but in the accumulated wisdom and baggage of countless generations. For the peculiarities of our memory may be less about our own personal history and more about a legacy etched into our very genes, a silent inheritance from our hunter-gatherer past. What if the reason you can remember a forest path from years ago, yet forget where you placed your keys this morning, is not a lapse in attention, but the whisper of a different kind of necessity? Imagine the mind of a hunter, 10,000 years ago. He walks through a forest he knows as intimately as his own breath. He can recall the exact bend in the river where the deer come to drink after the first autumn rain. He remembers the subtle fork in a game trail, almost invisible to the untrained eye, that leads to a clearing rich with berry bushes. His life, and the lives of those who depend on him, are woven from this intricate tapestry of spatial memory. He carries a living, three-dimensional map inside his skull, a map annotated with the scents of the seasons, the sounds of predators, and the silent language of the land. Now, fast forward to the present. You step out of a sprawling shopping mall, the glass doors sliding shut behind you. You pause, a flicker of unease. Where did you park the car? Was it level P3 near the pillar with the faded D? Or was it P4 by the elevator? The vast, artificially lit cavern of the parking garage offers no natural landmarks, no scent of pine or tracks in the mud. It offers only a uniform, repeating sameness. The same hunter's brain, honed over millennia to navigate the complex wilderness, is momentarily baffled by a simple, human-made maze. This is the paradox of our inherited memory. We possess a neurological machinery of astonishing power, a legacy from our foraging ancestors, yet we often feel a profound disconnect from its original purpose. What happened to the map? The answer begins in a seahorse-shaped structure buried deep within the temporal lobe, the hippocampus. For the hunter-gatherer, this was the command center for survival. Neuroscience reveals that the hippocampus is the engine of spatial navigation and episodic memory, the memory of autobiographical events. In the demanding world of our ancestors, where finding food, water, and shelter was a daily quest, a large and active hippocampus was non-negotiable. The brain, in its elegant efficiency, prioritized the retention of information that had immediate survival value. Remembering the location of a fresh water source was not a trivial task. It was the difference between life and death. The path to a productive hunting ground, the specific configuration of rocks that signaled a safe shelter, the subtle changes in vegetation that indicated a nearby predator. These were the files the brain flagged as essential and committed to long-term storage. The hippocampus was the diligent archivist, ensuring that the most critical chapters of the environmental story were preserved. This was not an abstract skill, but a deeply embedded cultural and practical reality. Consider the San people of the Kalahari or the Inuit of the Arctic. For the San, tracking an animal is a form of high-stakes storytelling. A broken twig, a disturbance in the sand, the faintest impression of a hoof. Each is a syllable in a narrative they can read and remember for days across vast, featureless terrain. Their memory is not an isolated faculty. It is a dialogue with the environment. For the Inuit, the ice is not a blank slate, but a dynamic, living text. They memorize the contours of pressure ridges, the subtle shades of blue that indicate thin ice, the patterns of snowdrifts that reveal the direction of prevailing winds. A single misremembered detail in this frozen labyrinth could lead to a fatal plunge. In these cultures, memory is externalized, fused with the world itself. The landscape is the library, and the mind is its most sophisticated index. The memory of a place is inseparable from the emotional weight of survival, the thrill of the hunt, the gnawing anxiety of thirst, the profound relief of finding the way home. It is memory steeped in feeling. Then came the great shift. We traded the untamed wilderness for the cultivated city, the game trail for the grid of streets. The most profound revolution, however, was the externalization of memory itself. We invented maps, first drawn on parchment, then printed on paper, and now glowing on the screens of our smartphones. This was a monumental achievement, a liberation of cognitive load. We no longer needed to internally map every square kilometer. The digital cartographer in our pocket knows the way. Our hippocampus, the ancient archivist, has been largely retired from its primary duty of spatial mapping. The brain, ever pragmatic, has reallocated its resources. The vast neural real estate once dedicated to remembering the lay of the land is now occupied by a frantic, swirling cloud of short-term data, project deadlines, meeting schedules, passwords, grocery lists, and the endless stream of digital notifications. But there is a crucial difference. The new data we feed our brains lacks the visceral, life-or-death urgency of the old. Remembering a PowerPoint slide for a 10 a.m. presentation does not carry the same emotional charge as remembering the location of a watering hole while being stalked by a lion. The modern information is transient, often devoid of strong sensory or emotional anchors. It is processed in the brain's inbox, but is rarely flagged for permanent filing. It is the cognitive equivalent of a sticky note, useful for a moment, then easily discarded. We are inundated with information, yet we struggle with a peculiar form of forgetfulness. We can recall a trivial fact from a website, but forget where we put our keys minutes ago. Is this a failure of memory, or simply a reprioritization? Has the very nature of what we consider important to remember been fundamentally altered? This leads to a compelling counter-argument. If spatial memory is such a deep-seated, hardwired instinct, why do so many of us get disoriented so easily? Why does a multi-story car park become a cognitive challenge? Is this a sign of degeneration, a slow atrophy of an ancient skill from lack of use? Perhaps it is not decay, but adaptation. The brain is a master of efficiency. It will not expend precious energy maintaining a skill that technology can replicate. The ability to navigate complex spaces may lie dormant, like a muscle that has not been exercised, but it is not necessarily gone. There is evidence that London taxi drivers, who must memorize the city's immense and labyrinthine street plan, have significantly larger hippocampi than the average person. The modern world may not require this skill from everyone, but the potential remains, a ghost in the machine, waiting to be reawakened. The question shifts from why have we lost it to what have we traded it for, and was it a fair exchange? To understand this trade-off, we must look more closely at the mechanism of memory itself. The brain is not a single storage unit, but a complex system with a strict hierarchy of importance. Think of it as having a busy central processing station and a vast silent archive. Experiences flood in through our senses, a constant roaring river of sight, sound, and smell. Most of this data is ephemeral, held for mere seconds in a temporary buffer before being discarded. But some information is selected for further processing. What determines which memories make the cut? What is the criteria for a memory to be deemed worthy of preservation, to be transferred from the fleeting present into the permanent past? The answer lies in understanding the gatekeeper, the structure that decides what we keep and what we let go. And so we return to the seahorse-shaped structure, the hippocampus. It acts less like a vault and more like a highly selective sorting facility, a grand central station for memories. Every day, countless sensory experiences arrive at its gates, clamoring for a ticket to long-term storage. But the station has limited capacity. Only the passengers with the proper credentials, the ones tagged with strong emotion, with repetition, with survival relevance, are allowed to board the train to the cortex, where memories are consolidated for the long haul. The rest are turned away, destined to fade into oblivion. This raises a deeper, more philosophical question about the very fabric of our identity. If our long-term memory is merely a curated collection of what a small, ancient brain structure deemed important, how much of our past is truly ours, and how much is simply an artifact of a survival algorithm we no longer fully understand? What becomes of a self when its foundational memories are just the lucky few that made it past the gate? You run into an old friend on a crowded street. You share a laugh, a brief story, and then part ways. A few minutes later, standing at a crosswalk, you struggle to recall the exact details of their anecdote. The conversation, so vivid moments ago, has already begun to fray at the edges, its colors bleeding into the noise of the day. But then, a stranger passes by, trailing a faint, familiar scent, a particular blend of jasmine and sandalwood, and suddenly, you are no longer on the street. You are on a misty morning in Jalat a decade ago. You feel the crisp mountain air on your skin, see the way the sunlight filtered through the pine trees, hear the echo of a specific laughter from that long-ago trip. One memory evaporates like breath on a mirror, while another, seemingly dormant for years, returns with the force of a tidal wave. Why does the mind discard the immediate so readily, yet cradle the distant with such astonishing fidelity? The answer lies in a small, seahorse-shaped structure deep within the brain, a gatekeeper standing between the fleeting present and the enduring past, the hippocampus. This intricate neural architecture, the hippocampus, functions not as a final repository, but as a critical processing station, a diligent curator of experience. Imagine it as a master archivist working in a library where new books arrive by the minute. Each book is a fresh memory, a packet of sensory information. The archivist's job is not to keep them all. The shelves would overflow instantly. Instead, they must quickly assess each volume. Is it significant? Does it have weight, a resonance that suggests it will be needed again? Information deemed trivial, the exact pattern of cracks on the pavement you just crossed, the specific sequence of words in a forgettable advertisement, is tagged for disposal, its constituent neural connections dissolved within hours. This is a merciful efficiency, a biological necessity to prevent our conscious minds from drowning in a sea of irrelevance. But what, then, gives a memory its weight? It is not merely the factual content, but the emotional charge woven into it. The archivist is swayed by feeling. A conversation about the weather is easily discarded. A conversation that made your heart race or filled you with sorrow carries a different gravity. It is this emotional weight that often determines whether a memory is deemed worthy of long-term storage, destined for the vast, distributed hard drive of the cerebral cortex. But if the hippocampus is the gatekeeper, who whispers the criteria for entry into its ear? To understand the profound importance of this filtering system, we must look back to the silent evidence etched into the fossilized skulls of our ancient ancestors. Comparative studies of early Homo sapiens reveal a peculiar and defining feature: a hippocampus that is disproportionately large compared to that of other hominids. This was not a random evolutionary flourish. For a species learning to navigate an unpredictable and dangerous world, the ability to retain complex long-term memories was a matter of life and death. The successful path to a seasonal water source, the intricate technique for crafting a spearhead that would not shatter upon impact, the remembered taste of a poisonous berry, these were not trivial details. They were the accumulated capital of survival. The hippocampus became the crucible where raw experience was forged into lasting knowledge. It allowed a hunter to learn from a failed pursuit, a gatherer to map the fruiting cycles of plants across seasons, an elder to transmit the lore of the tribe to the next generation. This neural development was the bedrock of culture itself, enabling the passage of skills and stories beyond the narrow limit of a single lifetime. Our ancestors did not just live in the moment, they carried their past with them, a living library curated by this seahorse-shaped gatekeeper. Is our modern sense of self, our narrative continuity, then, a direct inheritance from the survival needs of those who walk the savannah? Yet, this ancient, finely tuned system now operates in an environment its design could never have anticipated. The modern world, particularly for the young, is a relentless assault of fragmented information. We multitask, our attention splintered across smartphone notifications, simultaneous work tabs, and the continuous partial awareness of social media feeds. This constant influx creates a traffic jam at the gates of the hippocampus. The archivist is overwhelmed, buried under an avalanche of new, shallow, and disconnected books. There is no time for a deep assessment, no quiet moment for an emotional tag to be attached. The result is that experiences, even significant ones, often fail to be processed deeply enough to pass the threshold into long-term storage. We consume vast quantities of information, but we struggle to retain it. The data arrives and vanishes within hours, leaving little trace, like messages written on fogged glass. We end the day feeling busy, yet strangely empty, our memories a collection of ephemeral fragments rather than a coherent narrative. Have we, in our quest for connectivity and efficiency, inadvertently engineered a society that starves the very mechanism that allows us to build a lasting self? A compelling counter-argument emerges, however, in the form of individuals who seem to defy this fragility. We all know someone with a seemingly photographic memory, able to recall names, numbers, and complex sequences after a single exposure. Is this evidence of a neurological shortcut, a privileged bypass around the hippocampus's meticulous filtering process? Brain scans suggest otherwise. These prodigious feats of recall may not stem from a different brain structure, but from a highly trained skill of encoding. For them, the act of perception is different. They might automatically attach rich associations, mnemonic devices, or intense focus to raw information, effectively increasing its weight and ensuring its smooth passage through the hippocampal gate. It is less a bypass and more a mastery of the rules of entry, a way of presenting the archivist with a volume so beautifully bound and intuitively indexed that its preservation is guaranteed. This suggests that the limitations of our memory are not entirely fixed. They can be shaped by the quality of our attention. But does this mastery come at a cost? Does the ability to remember everything prevent the mind from discerning what is truly worth remembering? This brings us to the tantalizing question that hangs in the air, a question that bridges biology and the very essence of human experience. Can we consciously reprogram the hippocampus? Can we learn to become better curators of our own past? The answer does not lie in a simple memory technique, but in understanding the fundamental currency the hippocampus values. The gatekeeper is not primarily rational, it is emotional. The hormones that course through our bodies during moments of high stress, joy, fear, or love, cortisol, adrenaline, oxytocin, act as potent chemical tags, marking a memory as significant. This is why we remember where we were during a profound tragedy or the exact details of a first kiss with uncanny clarity. The emotion is the key that unlocks the gate to long-term storage. So, perhaps the art of building a richer memory is not about consuming more information, but about experiencing life more deeply and attentively, allowing events to be imbued with genuine feeling. It is about slowing down enough for the scent of jasmine to have meaning beyond a passing sensation. But if emotion is the gatekeeper's key, what does that mean for a memory formed in tranquility, or for the quiet, cumulative knowledge that shapes a life? Is a life less emotionally turbulent destined to be less memorable? And what becomes of us if the primary emotions we feed our hippocampus are the shallow anxieties and curated envy of a digital existence? The architecture of the hippocampus presents us with a profound choice about the architecture of our lives. But to truly grasp the nature of memory, we must also consider what remains when the gatekeeper itself falls silent. What happens when the archivist leaves his post and the flow of new books ceases entirely? The next layer of this journey leads us into the silent, eerie world of temporary amnesia, where the present vanishes like a ghost, yet the distant past plays on an endless loop. He wakes to the same sunbeam cutting across the same wallpaper, a new day that feels, to him, like an old one. Each morning, he is told it is not 1993, that the birthday he believes is today happened decades ago. The news is a fresh shock, a daily tremor that never solidifies into memory. Yet, later, when he sits before the piano, his fingers find the keys with a grace that defies his fractured mind. A complex sonata flows from his hands, a river of muscle memory running deep beneath the barren landscape of his conscious recall. He cannot tell you what he had for breakfast, but he can play a piece he learned as a young man. Note perfect, his body holding a truth his mind has forgotten. This man, living in a perpetual present, is a living paradox. He shows us that memory is not a single room, but a mansion with many chambers, some brightly lit and others accessible only through the body's own dark, intuitive passages. The biological key to this paradox lies in the architecture of the brain itself. Neuroscientists speak of two primary kingdoms of memory, declarative and non-declarative. Declarative memory is the library of our conscious life, the facts, the dates, the narrative of what we had for lunch yesterday. Its throne room is the hippocampus, a delicate seahorse-shaped structure crucial for filing new experiences. When this region is damaged, as it is in profound amnesia, the path to forming new declarative memories is blocked. The present moment becomes a grain of sand that slips through the fingers, never making it into the pearl of long-term recall. But non-declarative memory is a different kind of knowledge, written not in the language of facts, but in the dialect of the body. It is the memory of how to ride a bike, how to tie a shoelace, how to find a chord progression on a piano. This type of memory resides in older, deeper neural networks, the basal ganglia and the cerebellum regions that govern habit, skill, and procedure. They operate below the radar of conscious thought, like the silent, efficient engine room of a ship. The amnesiac man's ability to play the piano reveals this stark division. His hippocampus is a broken gatekeeper, but the ancient pathways of his motor cortex remain intact, their grooves worn deep by years of practice. His hands remember what his mind cannot, suggesting that our most essential knowledge might be stored not in stories, but in the very sinew and synapse of action. If declarative memory is the map we consciously draw, is non-declarative memory the compass we carry in our bones? This division of labor within our memory is not a recent evolutionary development. It is an ancient inheritance. Long before Homo sapiens began to narrate their lives, our ancestors, like Homo habilis, were mastering skills that ensured survival. The precise strike needed to flake a stone into a sharp tool, the rhythmic friction required to spark a flame. These were not intellectual puzzles to be solved each time, but movements to be engraved into the nervous system through relentless repetition. This was the original form of knowledge, procedural, physical, and deeply unconscious. Archaeological records show tools becoming more refined over millennia, not because each individual had a sudden brilliant idea, but because successful techniques, once discovered, became embedded as motor routines, passed down through imitation and practice. The memory of how to create fire was far more vital to survival than the memory of a single day's events. This ancient preference explains why, in the modern amnesiac, the skill of driving a car or kneading bread can persist long after the memory of their own name has faded. The brain, in its ruthless efficiency, prioritizes what has proven useful across generations. It holds on to the knowledge of how long after it has let go of the knowledge of who or when. In a sense, are we all, like the amnesiac, carrying the ghost of the toolmaker within us, our hands remembering what our conscious minds have long since left behind? This neural hierarchy offers a poignant explanation for the tenacity of certain skills in the face of devastating memory loss. A woman with advanced dementia may not recognize her daughter, but her hands might still perform the intricate motions of a lifelong craft, weaving a basket, icing a cake, swinging a golf club. It is as if the self, the narrative I, can dissolve while the accumulated wisdom of the body remains, a stubborn echo of a life lived. These actions are more than habits. They are anchors to a reality that has otherwise slipped away. The brain, in its ultimate pragmatism, seems to safeguard the behaviors that have a utilitarian, almost primal, value. The ability to perform a well-practiced action is a form of sovereignty, a pocket of competence in a world growing increasingly unfamiliar. This preservation of procedural memory is a small mercy, a testament to the brain's design favoring survival mechanisms over autobiographical detail. But does this very design reveal a chilling truth? That at our core, we are perhaps more a collection of adaptive behaviors than a coherent story we tell ourselves. Yet, this elegant biological explanation immediately raises a counterpoint, a puzzle of our everyday experience. If repetition is the golden key to engraving memory, why do we so easily forget the password we typed 100 times, the phone number we just looked up, or the lines of a speech we rehearsed relentlessly? We practice these things. We repeat them. Yet they often vanish when we need them most, while a song we haven't heard in 20 years plays perfectly in our mind. This common frustration highlights a crucial nuance. The type of information matters immensely. Rote repetition of arbitrary abstract symbols, a string of digits, a random password, is a weak engraving tool compared to the chisel of meaning and emotion. The brain appears to have a filter, a kind of internal editor that asks a simple, brutal question: is this information relevant to my survival or well-being? A phone number in isolation is not. But the emotional charge of a first kiss, the visceral fear of a near accident, or the satisfying rhythm of a well-learned song, these are tagged as significant. The man who cannot form new declarative memories might still flinch from a loud noise, a conditioned fear response that bypasses the hippocampus entirely. So, the problem is not just the act of repetition, but the nature of the thing being repeated. How can we convince our ancient, survival-oriented brain that a modern, abstract piece of information is as worthy of preservation as the memory of a predator's shadow? This leads us to the edge of a deeper understanding. The fragility of a forgotten password and the resilience of a well-practiced skill are two sides of the same coin, minted by evolution. One is dry data, easily discarded. The other is lived experience, woven into the fabric of our neural being. The amnesiac's piano playing is not just a neurological curiosity. It is a profound lesson in what endures when the surface of the self is stripped away. It suggests that our identities are built upon a foundation far older and more resilient than the stories we collect, a foundation of movement, habit, and embodied knowledge. But if procedural memory is so robust and declarative memory so fragile, then the ultimate challenge becomes one of translation. How do we bridge the gap? How do we take the cold, hard facts of our modern world, the numbers, the names, the abstract concepts, and imbue them with the kind of emotional or sensory weight that our brains are wired to never forget? Is the secret to lasting memory not merely repetition, but the art of transformation, of turning information into experience? And if so, what is the alchemy that allows a simple fact to be felt deeply in the same way our hands feel the weight of a well-used tool? A car accident, a failed confession of love, a farewell embrace. These memories are vivid, clear, as if they happened only yesterday. Yet, you cannot recall what you wore the day before. This paradox is a quiet testament to a fundamental truth of our existence. The human brain does not record life with the impartial lens of a camera. It is a storyteller, a curator that selects its material not by objective importance, but by the raw, electric charge of emotion. Our past is not a chronological archive. It is a gallery of feelings, where the most intense moments are illuminated and the mundane fades into obscurity. Why would a system so crucial for survival choose such a seemingly unreliable guide? The answer is written deep within our biology, etched into the very architecture of our minds, suggesting that to feel is perhaps the most ancient way to know. Nestled deep within the temporal lobes of the brain, two almond-shaped clusters of neurons, the amygdalae, stand as vigilant sentinels. Their primary role is to process emotion, to sound the alarm of fear, to register the warm glow of joy. But they do not work in isolation. They are intricately, directly wired to the hippocampus, the brain's master librarian for forming new memories. When an event carries a strong emotional weight, the surge of adrenaline in a moment of danger, the profound warmth of a deep connection, the amygdala ignites. It sends a powerful signal to the hippocampus, a chemical shout that essentially says, "This matters, mark this one deeply." This is not a flaw in the system, it is its genius. For our distant ancestors, learning which berry caused sickness or which predator's shadow meant death was not an intellectual exercise. It was a lesson seared into the psyche by fear and pain. The memory of a successful hunt, celebrated with the tribe, was cemented by collective triumph, ensuring the knowledge of that technique and location would be readily available for next time. Emotion was the highlighter pen of evolution, underlining the paragraphs of experience that were essential for survival. The mundane details of a peaceful afternoon held no such charge, and thus were allowed to slip away like water through sand. Is it any wonder, then, that our most persistent memories are so often tied to the very feelings that once ensured we would live to remember another day? This biological imperative to remember through feeling did not just shape individual minds, it built civilizations. Long before the written word, human societies relied on the transmission of memory across generations. Archaeology reveals that our ancestors were masters of emotional engineering. They did not simply record events. They infused them with profound collective sentiment. Burial rituals were not just practical disposals of the dead. They were elaborate, sorrowful, and reverent ceremonies that bound the community together in shared grief and belief in an afterlife. The paintings on cave walls at Lascaux or Chauvet are not mere depictions of animals. They are pulsating with the tension of the hunt, the mystical power of the beast, the awe of the natural world. These images were likely created and viewed in a context of ritual, accompanied by chants and dances, all designed to trigger powerful emotions. Seasonal festivals, marking the solstice or the harvest, were not just calendars. They were collective emotional peaks, times of hope, gratitude, and celebration. By wrapping crucial knowledge, where to find water, how to navigate by stars, the stories of the gods, in the visceral cloak of emotion, these cultures ensured their survival manuals were unforgettable. The knowledge became a song, a dance, a shared tear. The memory was no longer a solitary fact in one mind. It was a living, breathing entity, sustained by the heartbeats of the entire tribe. What does it say about us that our most enduring cultural artifacts are not lists of facts, but monuments to our deepest feelings? In the modern world, this ancient machinery continues to operate, even as our environment has transformed beyond recognition. The survival threats may have changed, from saber-toothed tigers to social rejection, from finding food to meeting deadlines, but the brain's filing system remains the same. We effortlessly remember the plot of a movie that made us weep, the impassioned lecture of a teacher who spoke with conviction, the intimate conversation that forged a bond. These experiences are tagged with emotional significance, granting them a privileged spot in our neural archives. They carry a perceived survival value, not in the literal sense of avoiding predation, but in the social sense of belonging, understanding, and navigating the complex web of human relationships. Conversely, the dry administrative details of a Tuesday, the endless stream of passwords and pins, the specific wording of a forgettable email, these are the modern equivalent of the uneventful afternoon on the savannah. Devoid of emotional resonance, they are efficiently purged, making room for what the brain deems truly important. Our news cycles, our social media feeds, our entertainment, are all optimized to trigger this very mechanism, delivering a constant drip of outrage, joy, and anxiety that ensures we pay attention and remember. Have we, in our technological sophistication, simply created a new landscape for our ancient emotional brain to navigate, often to its own detriment? For this system, this emotional curator, carries a profound and inherent danger. The same mechanism that perfectly preserves the lesson of a poisonous plant also etches the memory of a trauma with excruciating clarity, leading to phobias and post-traumatic stress. The bias that helps us remember a triumphant success also fuels our tendency to recall insults and failures more vividly than kindnesses and victories, distorting our personal narratives toward the negative. Our memories are not pristine recordings. They are reconstructions, and each time we recall an emotional event, we risk altering it, coloring it with our present mood, reinforcing the bias. Courtrooms grapple with the unreliability of eyewitness testimony under stress. Individuals struggle with grudges held for decades over words whose exact meaning may be lost, but whose emotional sting remains sharp. The very tool that ensured our survival can become a prison, locking us into cycles of anxiety and resentment. If our memory is sculpted by emotion, and emotion is inherently subjective, can any memory truly be called objective? Or are we all, in a sense, telling ourselves a story about the past, a story whose plot is dictated by the feelings we experienced in the moment? So we are left with a paradox. Emotion is the key that unlocks deep memory, the force that allows us to carry our past within us. Yet, it is also the filter that distorts, the weight that can anchor us to pain. This leads to a tantalizing question. If this process is biological, can it be guided? Is there a way to curate the curator, to somehow influence which emotional memories are solidified and which are let go? The answer may not lie in conscious effort during our waking hours, but in the silent, mysterious work that happens after we close our eyes. It is in the realm of sleep and memory consolidation, a nightly workshop where the brain sifts through the day's experiences, strengthening some neural connections and pruning others. Perhaps this is where the raw, emotional footage of the day is edited, where memories are stripped of their sharpest edges or, conversely, burned more deeply into our being. What if the quality of our past is determined not just by the events we live through, but by the nights we spend dreaming them away? And if we could peer into that nocturnal laboratory, what would we learn about the art of forgetting, which is just as crucial as the art of remembering? This interplay between internal feeling and external record raises another, quieter wonder. If our personal memory is so tied to emotion, what does it mean for a memory that exists outside of us, anchored not in the heart, but in the landscape itself? Consider a different kind of knowing, one not of feeling, but of place. An Aboriginal elder in Australia can recall the precise turns of a songline stretching for hundreds of kilometers, each feature of the land, a peculiar rock, a solitary tree, encoded in the rhythm and verse of an ancient song. He needs no map, for the land itself is his memory palace, and the song is the key. Meanwhile, a modern city dweller follows the turn-by-turn commands of a GPS, arriving at the destination with no true recollection of the journey, the knowledge discarded the moment the engine is turned off. This is not a story of memory getting weaker. It is a story of its tools changing, of outsourcing navigation from an internal embodied poem to an external digital device. But what is lost in that transaction, and what is gained? Does the song, rich with story and connection to the earth, create a different quality of memory than the sterile command to turn left in 200 meters? And if our tools for remembering shape the memories themselves, what kind of past are we building for our future? Imagine a song, a simple melody passed from one generation to the next. For the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, this song is not just a story, it is a map. It charts the course across hundreds of kilometers of arid desert, naming every waterhole, every distinctive rock formation, every turn in an invisible path. A man who has never left his community can hear this song and know the journey as intimately as if he had walked it himself. Now, consider the quiet frustration of standing in your newly rented apartment, utterly baffled, having already forgotten which switch controls the kitchen light. Spatial memory, a profound instinctual talent for some, is a fleeting, fickle ghost for others. This chasm between the unerring navigator and the perpetually disoriented urban dweller is not merely a matter of practice. It is a story written in the deep folds of our brains, etched by our ancestors, and quietly erased by the conveniences of our time. At the heart of this story lies a biological marvel, a cartographer nestled within the temporal lobes of our brain, the hippocampus. This seahorse-shaped structure is the architect of our cognitive map, an internal GPS that constantly plots our position in space. It does not work with the cold precision of a satellite, but with the rich, messy detail of lived experience. When we navigate a new environment, specialized neurons, place cells, fire with a unique electrical signature, painting a neural representation of a specific location. Another set, grid cells, creates a hexagonal coordinate system, a subtle lattice upon which our movements are tracked. This system is ancient, a gift from our evolutionary past, designed for hunting, gathering, and survival. Yet, its efficiency is not guaranteed. It thrives on repetition, on emotional charge, on context. The path you walk every day to the bus stop becomes a well-worn groove in your mind. The labyrinthine alley where you got lost on a rainy night in a foreign city is seared into your memory with a vividness that a straightforward route home could never achieve. The hippocampus is not a passive recorder. It is an active storyteller, weaving location into the fabric of narrative and feeling. Could it be that our forgetfulness is not a failure of this system, but a sign that the stories we are living are not compelling enough for the cartographer to bother charting? Long before the hippocampus was a scientific term, ancient cultures understood its principles intuitively. The Aboriginal songlines of Australia, the wave-reading prowess of the Polynesian voyagers, the intricate mental maps of snow and ice held by the Inuit. These are not just feats of memory. They are sophisticated technologies of the mind, cultural systems engineered to work in perfect harmony with our neural hardware. For these cultures, spatial knowledge was survival, and so they embedded it in the most durable and transmissible formats available: rhythm, rhyme, and myth. A Polynesian navigator, steering a canoe across the vast emptiness of the Pacific, did not memorize a static image of the stars. He learned chants that connected the rising of specific constellations to the swell of particular ocean currents, to the flight patterns of birds, to the taste of the water. The information was not stored as discrete facts, but as an interconnected symphony of sensory data. The landscape itself became a living text, every mountain and river a character in an epic story. This method of encoding space through narrative ensured that knowledge could be passed down for millennia with astonishing accuracy. The map was not a thing to be carried. It was a song to be sung, a story to be lived. Is our modern sense of direction impoverished because we have lost the art of singing our journeys? Our modern world presents a curious paradox. We have never had more access to precise, real-time spatial data. A glowing blue dot on a smartphone screen can guide us through the most convoluted urban jungles with an infallibility that ancient navigators could only dream of. Yet this convenience comes at a subtle cost. The constant reliance on GPS may be quietly dismantling our innate ability to build cognitive maps. When we surrender to the turn-by-turn commands of a digital voice, we switch from active explorers to passive passengers. The hippocampus is no longer required to fire its place cells with the same urgency, to puzzle over shortcuts, to build a rich, three-dimensional model of our surroundings. The world outside our windshield becomes a blur, a mere background scrolling past, rather than a space to be understood and internalized. We arrive at our destination efficiently, but we have not truly traveled the path. We remember the route, but we have forgotten the space. We trade the deep, embodied knowledge of the songline for the shallow, transactional data of the algorithm. In our quest for effortless navigation, have we inadvertently traded a fundamental part of our human experience for a mere convenience? Yet, even in this GPS-saturated age, there are exceptions. There are individuals who can walk through a complex building once and recall the location of every door, every staircase, every subtle change in elevation. They possess what seems like a superpower, an innate sense of direction that defies the trend of modern forgetfulness. Is this a rare genetic gift? A quirk of a particularly robust hippocampus? Or is it a skill that can be cultivated, a latent potential within all of us that is simply waiting for the right conditions to awaken? Perhaps these modern navigators are the inheritors of the ancient way, people who, consciously or not, engage with space as a story. They might notice the way light falls in a corridor, associate a particular smell with an intersection, or create a mental narrative of their journey. They are not just seeing, they are sensing and connecting. Their ability suggests that the hardware for profound spatial memory is still there, lying dormant within our skulls, waiting for us to switch off the automated guide and start singing our own song lines once more. If the human brain possesses such a remarkable, almost magical capacity to remember space with such vividness and accuracy, what then determines when it chooses to remember and when it chooses to forget? The answer may not lie in the moments of experience themselves, but in what happens after, in the quiet, shadowy hours of the night. For the brain is not just a recorder of information, it is a ruthless editor. Every day, we are inundated with a torrent of sensory input, a chaotic flood of details. To make sense of it all, to prevent overload, the brain must make choices. It must decide what to keep and what to discard. And in the silent, systematic cleansing of sleep, the fine details, the very texture of our experiences, are often the first to be swept away. What is the true cost of this necessary forgetting? If our cognitive map is refined and solidified during slumber, what landscapes are being erased from our internal world to make room for the essential highways? The journey into memory, it seems, must now descend into the realm of dreams and the quiet, relentless editing of the sleeping mind. You finish a 2-hour meeting, your mind buzzing with a vague sense of accomplishment and fatigue. Someone asks you, "What exactly did your boss say at the 30-minute mark?" You draw a complete blank. You were there, you were listening, yet the specific words have evaporated. It's not a failure of attention. You were focused. So where did that half hour go? Was it simply lost? Or did your brain, in its infinite and ancient wisdom, deliberately choose to let it slip away? This is not a glitch in the system. It is the system itself, a feature honed over millions of years. The price of speed, it turns out, is paid in detail. At the biological level, this forgetting is not a deficit, but a sophisticated survival strategy. Every second, your brain is bombarded with millions of bits of sensory information. The hum of the computer, the pressure of the chair against your skin, the flicker of light on the screen, the complex syntax of spoken language. To process all of this with high fidelity would be like trying to drink from a fire hose. The system would instantly overload and shut down. Instead, the prefrontal cortex acts as a masterful, if ruthless, editor. It functions as a high-speed filter, making split-second decisions about what is relevant and what is noise. This filtering prioritizes processing speed over archival detail. The brain's primary goal is not to create a perfect frame-by-frame recording of your life, but to generate a usable model of the world that allows for rapid, life-preserving action. The intricate details of a conversation, the specific pattern of tiles on the ceiling, the exact sequence of a colleague's sentences, these are often deemed expendable in the service of extracting the gist. The boss is unhappy, the project is delayed, a new direction is needed. This strategic amnesia is the cognitive equivalent of a triage nurse on a battlefield, making swift, cold calculations about who can be saved and who must be left behind. What does it mean that our most advanced cognitive machinery is built not for perfect recall, but for efficient and necessarily incomplete forgetting? This cognitive triage is an ancient inheritance, a legacy written into our DNA by the relentless pressures of survival on the African savanna. Consider our ancestor, Homo erectus, standing on the grassy plain. They did not need to remember the exact number of spots on the flank of a predator or the precise angle of every branch on the path to the watering hole. Such granular detail was not just useless, it was dangerous. Hesitation, born of an over-cluttered mind analyzing too many variables, could mean death. What was essential was to recognize patterns, the silhouette of a lurking lion, the specific rustle of grass that signaled danger, the general route to safety. The brain evolved to store these critical templates, these archetypes of threat and opportunity, while discarding the ephemeral specifics of each individual encounter. Remembering every single detail of a successful hunt might actually hinder the next one, as conditions would never be exactly the same. The brain learned to keep the lesson, the effective spear-throwing motion, the vulnerable spot on the prey, and discard the clutter of the particular event. Survival favored the generalist who could adapt quickly over the archivist who was paralyzed by data. Is our modern inability to recall meeting details merely the echo of a primal need to see the forest and not get lost among the trees? Yet, the world we have built for ourselves is a strange and demanding inversion of that ancient environment. Modern society, with its endless streams of digital communication, back-to-back video calls, and relentless demand for instant responses, operates on a principle of immediate throughput. We are required to process, decide, and move on at a pace that is neurologically unprecedented. In response, our brains have doubled down on their evolutionary optimization strategy. They have become masters of the quick, disposable summary. The boring middle part of the meeting, the predictable pleasantries in an email chain, the routine commute. These segments are often tagged as low priority, lacking in emotional salience or personal stakes. They are the cognitive equivalent of the thousands of identical blades of grass our ancestors ignored. The brain, in its efficiency, allocates minimal resources to their encoding, treating them as transient scripts to be executed and then discarded. This is why you can drive a familiar route and arrive with no memory of the journey itself. The procedural memory handled the task, freeing your conscious mind to wander. We are living in an age of information abundance, but our brains are still running on a scarcity-based operating system designed for a world of immediate physical threats. Does this fundamental mismatch explain the pervasive sense of anxiety and mental fragmentation that characterizes modern life? There is, of course, a powerful counterpoint to this narrative. Certain professions are built upon the very antithesis of this cognitive streamlining. A forensic scientist must note the minutest fiber, a journalist must recall the exact wording of a source, a copy editor must spot the single errant comma in a sea of text. Their work demands a fidelity of memory that seems to defy the brain's inherent tendency to generalize and forget. Does this mean these individuals possess a fundamentally different neural architecture? The answer is likely more about training than innate biology. Through intense, deliberate practice, they learn to consciously override the automatic filters. They teach their prefrontal cortex to assign high priority to details that would otherwise be flagged as irrelevant. They create elaborate systems of external and internal notation, building scaffolds to support a level of recall that is not our cognitive default. It is a form of mental discipline that fights against the current of our evolutionary instincts, a conscious effort to preserve what the unconscious mind is programmed to discard. This raises a profound question about human potential. Are we defined by our biological constraints, or by our ability to consciously rewire the very instincts that shaped us? To truly unravel this paradox, why we forget a lunch but remember a route home, we must peer deeper into the architecture of memory itself. The answer lies not in a single faculty, but in the delicate interplay between two distinct systems. There is the memory you can declare, the facts and events you can consciously recall and describe. And then, there is the other kind, the silent, procedural knowledge that guides your body without a single conscious thought. One is a library you can visit, the other is the hidden machinery that keeps the lights on. What is the nature of this divide between the memory we know we have and the memory that simply is us? You can forget the password to your email, a sequence of characters you consciously rehearsed just yesterday, but your hands will still perform the intricate ballet of brushing your teeth with unerring precision. They know the exact pressure, the circular motion, the duration, all without a single conscious thought. This daily paradox hints at a fundamental schism within our own minds, a division of labor in the architecture of memory. It suggests that what we call remembering is not one single process, but at least two distinct rivers of experience flowing through the brain, one bright with the light of awareness, the other a deep, dark, powerful current running beneath. The biological blueprint for this duality is etched into the very structures of our brain. Neuroscientists map this terrain by distinguishing between declarative and non-declarative memory. Declarative memory is the library of the conscious self. It deals in facts and events: your mother's birthday, the capital of France, the plot of the film you saw last week. It is the memory you declare you have. This library is housed primarily in the hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped region deep within the temporal lobe, a fragile curator susceptible to the erasures of time, distraction, or injury. But then there is the other kind, the non-declarative or procedural memory. This is the memory of the body, of skills and habits. It resides in older, more resilient territories: the cerebellum, which fine-tunes motor coordination, and the basal ganglia, which helps automate routines. This memory is not a fact to be recalled, but a pattern to be executed. It is a silent knowledge, a wisdom written in the language of muscle and nerve. This is why a person with severe amnesia, who cannot form new declarative memories, can still learn to solve a complex puzzle faster each day, even while insisting they have never seen it before. Their conscious mind is blind, but their hands remember the path. If we could trace the lineage of these two memory streams back through the deep time of our species, we would see that the non-declarative river is the ancient one. Long before our ancestors could declare the name of a tool or articulate the principles of fire, their hands knew. The skill of knapping flint into a sharp edge, the rhythm of rubbing sticks to generate heat, the subtle pressure required to grind grain. These were not facts to be learned, but dances to be embodied. This was a how-to memory, passed down not through language, but through mimicry and practice, etched into the nervous system over generations. It was a knowledge that resided in the curve of the thumb and the strength of the shoulder. One did not need to know the what or the why in a declarative sense. One needed only to know the how that ensured survival. This deep procedural wisdom is the bedrock upon which culture was built, a silent inheritance that allowed skills to outlive their individual inventors. In our modern world, this ancient automation is more active than ever, operating just below the surface of our busy conscious minds. You have likely forgotten the specific lecture in which you learned the principles of grammar, but your fingers dance across a keyboard, translating thought into text with astonishing speed. You don't consciously recall the steps to riding a bicycle or boiling water for pasta. Your body simply knows. The brain, in its relentless quest for efficiency, automates the mundane. It takes repetitive tasks and transfers them from the energy-intensive, easily overloaded declarative system to the streamlined, unconscious autopilot of the procedural system. This is a gift of cognitive economy, freeing our conscious awareness to focus on novelty, problem-solving, and the complex tapestry of social life. Our declarative memory is the brilliant but easily distracted executive, while our non-declarative memory is the vast, reliable workforce that keeps the fundamental operations of our lives running smoothly. Yet this elegant system presents a puzzle. If procedural memory is so powerful and efficient, why is the initial acquisition of a new skill, learning to drive a car, to play a musical instrument, to navigate a new software, often so laborious, slow, and fraught with conscious effort? Why must we clumsily think through every gear shift, every chord finger placement, every menu selection before it becomes second nature? The struggle lies in the transfer. The journey from the bright, noisy workshop of conscious deliberation to the silent, fluid factory of automaticity is not instantaneous. It is a process of engraving. Each repetition is like a chisel stroke, carving the new pathway deeper and deeper into the neural substrate. It requires a dialogue between the brain's hemispheres, a slow handing over of control from the novice to the expert within. This process of handover, however, is not merely mechanical. It is influenced by forces that seem to belong to a different realm altogether. What is the role of emotion, that powerful and often irrational current, in cementing a memory? Does the thrill of mastering a difficult chord, or the frustration of stalling the car, act as a catalyst, accelerating the journey from conscious effort to unconscious skill? And what of the mysterious passive state of sleep? Science tells us that during slumber, the brain is not idle. It is a bustling port, consolidating the day's experiences, replaying the neural patterns of new learning, and strengthening the connections that will make tomorrow's performance smoother. Is sleep, then, the silent alchemist that transforms the lead of clumsy practice into the gold of effortless ability? This transformation, from the fragile knowledge of the mind to the resilient wisdom of the body, suggests that our deepest understandings may not be those we can easily explain, but those we simply are. It forces us to wonder if our most essential knowledge is written in a language before words, then what other silent truths are held within the quiet intelligence of our own flesh? And what happens when a scent, a mere whisper of molecules on the air, can bypass all our careful cataloging and plunge us directly into the heart of a forgotten moment? You are walking down a bustling city street, the air thick with the exhaust of traffic and the hurried scent of 1,000 strangers. Then it happens. A ghost of a smell carried on a wayward breeze, the unmistakable tangy aroma of bún riêu, a Vietnamese crab noodle soup. And in an instant, you are no longer on the street. The concrete vanishes, replaced by the worn linoleum of a small kitchen. The city's roar softens into the static crackle of an old AM radio. You feel the warmth of the steam on your face, see the gentle curve of your grandmother's back as she stirs the pot, a lifetime of stories held in her posture. The memory is not a recollection, it is an immersion. It is alive. Why does a simple scent possess this strange power to collapse time so completely, to pull us backward with a force that sight or sound so rarely achieves? The answer begins not in the kitchen, but in the ancient architecture of our own minds. Unlike the information from our eyes or ears, which is routed through a sophisticated processing center in the thalamus before being distributed, the pathway for smell is a more direct, more primal line. A scent molecule enters the nose and binds to receptors, sending an electrical signal on a remarkably short journey. This signal travels directly to two neighboring regions buried deep within the brain: the amygdala, the seat of raw emotion, and the hippocampus, the library of personal memory. There is no executive editor, no cerebral cortex to first analyze and label the smell. It arrives unfiltered, drenched in the emotional context of the moment. A smell, therefore, is never just a smell. It is a key that bypasses the rational mind to unlock the vault of feeling. The scent of bún riêu does not first register as soup. It arrives as safety, as love, as a childhood afternoon. It is a message sent from the past to the present, written in the chemical language of the limbic system. But why was this backdoor entrance ever built? What survival advantage could such an intimate link between smell and memory possibly confer? To understand that, we must travel back further, to a world where the air itself was a text to be read for life or death. For our early Homo sapiens ancestors, vision could be deceived by shadows, and hearing by echoes, but smell was an unblinking truth-teller. The ability to distinguish the faint sweetness of rotting meat from the fresh scent of a kill meant the difference between nourishment and poison. The sharp, musky odor of a predator's urine on the trail was a silent, invisible warning sign, more eloquent than any shout. A misread scent was not a nostalgic inconvenience, it was a final mistake. In this world, survival depended on forging indelible links between specific odors and critical outcomes. The smell of a particular berry that once caused illness needed to trigger immediate and powerful aversion. The scent of rain on dry earth needed to signal the coming of water. These were not abstract memories. They were visceral, emotional bookmarks for survival. The brain evolved to treat smell with the utmost seriousness, etching odor event pairs into our neural circuitry with the sharp tool of emotion. Is it any wonder, then, that this ancient alarm system, designed to keep us alive, now serves as a time machine for our most personal moments? In our modern world, the stakes have changed. We no longer need to sniff the wind for saber-toothed cats or test berries for toxicity. Yet this archaic wiring remains, a ghost in the machine of our contemporary lives. We are ambushed by echoes. The faint smell of a specific perfume in a crowded elevator can momentarily resurrect a long-lost love. The heartache feeling as fresh as the day it was born. The scent of sawdust might return a person to their father's workshop. The feeling of awe and safety as tangible as the wood grain under their fingers. While a photograph can show us a moment, and a song can remind us of a feeling, a smell has the power to return us to the moment, to make us feel the feeling all over again. It is a key to a lock that language and imagery cannot even find. It accesses a library of the self that is written not in words, but in sensations. But if this mechanism is so potent, so immediate, why does it seem so fickle? Why can the smell of a complex, delicious meal from yesterday fade into oblivion by this afternoon, while the scent of a schoolroom pencil sharpener from decades ago remains vivid and potent? This is the paradox of scent and memory. It is not the olfactory detail itself that carves the groove so deep. It is the emotional charge that accompanies it. A mundane lunch, eaten alone while scrolling through emails, leaves little more than a faint impression, no matter how strong its aroma. The neural pathway is paved but not reinforced. It is a dirt road that quickly washes away. But a meal shared with laughter, or eaten in a time of grief, or prepared by a beloved hand, these experiences are drenched in emotional significance. The amygdala floods the system with neurotransmitters, acting as a highlighter for the memory, instructing the hippocampus. This is important. Keep this. The smell becomes the anchor, the most efficient retrieval cue for that specific emotional state. So the power lies not in the nose, but in the heart. The scent is merely the trigger. The emotional payload is the bullet. But this raises a deeper, more unsettling question. If emotion is the architect of memory, then who or what is the architect of emotion? Are we merely the passive recipients of these chemical highlights, or is there a deeper conductor in the mind, deciding which moments to gild and which to let fade? Perhaps the memories we think we have lost are not gone at all. They are simply displaced, compressed into the vast, silent archives of the subconscious. They wait, not as stories we can tell, but as potential, as imprints. And when the right key is inserted, a specific scent, a particular tone of light, a fragment of melody, the lock turns, and the past floods forth, as vivid and as real as the present. It suggests that our minds are not flawed recorders, losing data over time, but masterful curators, storing the essence of our experiences in a hidden gallery. What else lies waiting in those silent halls, and what other forgotten keys might we still possess? You're washing dishes, your hands submerged in warm, soapy water, the rhythm of the chore almost hypnotic. Your mind is adrift, nowhere in particular, when it happens. A melody, a ghost from 20 years ago, rises unbidden and complete. The song you spent an entire afternoon last week trying to recall, the one whose title danced just beyond the edge of your consciousness, has now returned in full orchestral splendor. It didn't feel like remembering. It felt like a visitation. This common experience whispers a profound truth about the architecture of our minds. Memory is not a filing cabinet from which things go missing. It is a living landscape, and a forgotten memory is not erased. It has merely relocated, waiting for the right conditions to bloom once more. This phenomenon finds its roots in the intricate biology of the brain. A memory is not a single, discrete object stored in one specific drawer. Instead, it is a pattern, a unique constellation of neurons firing in a specific sequence, bound together by synapses, the infinitesimal gaps where brain cells communicate. Think of a vast, dark forest at night. A memory is not a single tree, but a specific path illuminated by a chain of lanterns. When you struggle to recall a name or a fact, it is not that the path has been destroyed. The lanterns are still there, but the electrical impulse, the signal to light them, cannot find its way. The synaptic connections have been temporarily weakened, perhaps from lack of use, like a trail overgrown with disuse. The neural pathway exists, but the bridge is down. The memory is present, yet inaccessible, a ghost in the machine of the self. This is why recall is so often context-dependent. The scent of rain on hot asphalt might suddenly resurrect a childhood afternoon with startling clarity, because that specific sensory input provides the spark to reignite the entire dormant network. The memory was never lost. It was simply waiting for the right key. So, if our brains are so adept at preserving these traces, why do they make the retrieval process so deliberately and at times so frustratingly conditional? Long before neuroscience began mapping these neural pathways, our ancestors understood this principle intuitively. They built entire cultures around the art of conditional recall. For oral traditions that spanned generations, forgetting was not an option. It was an existential threat. The solution was not to attempt the impossible feat of holding every story, every law, every genealogical line in constant conscious thought. Instead, they created triggers, elaborate rituals, rhythmic chants, symbolic patterns carved into totems or woven into textiles. These were not mere decorations or ceremonies. They were sophisticated mnemonic technologies, designed to act as keys for the vast libraries of knowledge stored in the collective mind. A shaman singing a specific song by the fire was not just entertaining. He was executing a precise sequence to unlock a specific set of memories crucial for the tribe's survival and identity. The knowledge of which plant healed, which illness, or how to navigate by the stars, did not exist in a state of constant availability. It slept deep within the mind until the correct ritual, the correct sensory and emotional stimulus, awakened it. The memory was cued, not constantly maintained. This suggests that our minds have always operated on a principle of efficiency, preserving energy by allowing vast swathes of our experience to recede into a latent state, ready to be summoned when the situation demands. But if ancient rituals could trigger collective memory, what are the modern equivalents that summon our own personal ghosts? In our contemporary world, saturated with information and sensory input, these moments of unexpected recall feel like small miracles. They are collisions with our past selves that bypass our conscious efforts. A few bars of a forgotten pop song on a grocery store speaker can transport you, viscerally, to the sticky vinyl interior of your first car. The particular weight of autumn air, carrying the smell of wood smoke and decaying leaves, can bring forth a long-buried feeling of adolescent longing with an intensity that is almost painful. These are not random malfunctions of the mind. They are demonstrations of its brilliant associative logic. The memory of the song is intricately tied to the memory of the car, the feeling of freedom, the specific quality of the light on that day. The memory of the feeling is woven into the sensory fabric of the season. When the trigger is encountered, the entire tapestry is pulled into the present. The memory was not deleted in the relentless upgrade of our personal operating systems. It was simply archived in a format that our waking, goal-oriented consciousness no longer knows how to read. It lies dormant, a sleeper agent waiting for its activation code. This raises a tantalizing and perhaps unsettling question. If a specific scent can unlock a decade-old memory, what else lies buried within the neural archives, waiting for a trigger that may never come? This leads us to a necessary counterpoint, a shadow to this optimistic view of permanent preservation. If memories are merely dormant, what determines which ones stir and which remain in their slumber? Why do some rise effortlessly to the surface, while others, no matter how hard we strive, resist all attempts at recovery? The process seems frustratingly passive, a game of chance played with our own identities. Is there a way to become the active curators of our own mental museums? Can we learn to navigate the labyrinth of our own synapses to retrieve what we need, when we need it? Techniques like meditation or focused sensory immersion attempt to do just this, to quiet the noise of the present and listen for the faint echoes of the past. Yet, for every successful retrieval, there remains the haunting possibility of a memory that is, for all practical purposes, lost. Not because it is gone, but because the path to it has become so overgrown that no stimulus can ever light the way again. This is the fragile nature of the self, built not just on what we remember, but on what we can access. So, where does this delicate process of storage and retrieval, of hiding and revealing, actually take place? When does the mind perform its most crucial archival work? The answer may lie in the one state where we are most absent from ourselves: sleep. This is the silent, nocturnal workshop of memory. While our conscious self is offline, dreaming its abstract dreams, a vast and meticulous reorganization is underway. The brain sifts through the day's experiences, the conversations, the sensations, the fragments of learning. It makes judgment calls, deciding what to keep and what to discard. It is here, in this dark and quiet laboratory, that the brain supposedly moves information from the temporary holding bay of the hippocampus to the more permanent distributed storage of the cortex. It strengthens some synaptic connections and prunes others. But this raises a deeper, more philosophical unease. If the sleeping brain is the ultimate archivist, what are its criteria? What does it deem unimportant enough to be swept away? And if a memory is weakened or severed from its network during this nightly cleanse, has it truly been relocated, or has it, in a very real sense, begun its final journey into oblivion? Is forgetting, then, not a failure of retrieval, but an active and perhaps necessary act of curation by a hidden part of ourselves? You've spent the entire night hunched over your textbooks, the words blurring into a mosaic of determined effort. By dawn, you feel a fragile confidence. The information is there, held tightly in your mind. But then, the morning arrives. You sit down. The question is posed, and the answer is a ghost. It's not that you don't know it. It's that you can't find it. The library of your mind has been locked overnight. Conversely, there is the strange magic of the afternoon nap. After a brief, frustrated struggle with a problem, you surrender to sleep. Upon waking, the solution appears not as a result of conscious effort, but as a gift, fully formed and waiting. Why does a state of unconsciousness, a seeming void, become the very crucible where memory is forged and understanding crystallized? The answer begins not with a philosopher's musing, but deep within the silent cellular architecture of the brain. During the slow rhythmic waves of deep sleep, known as NREM, a meticulous process of internal housekeeping begins. The brain, no longer bombarded by the day's constant sensory input, turns its attention inward. It is here, in this quietude, that the day's experiences are replayed. But this replay is not a simple recording. It is an active editorial process. Neurons that fired together while you learned a new skill or memorized a sequence of facts now fire together again in a compressed, accelerated symphony. This neural echo, this practiced dance, strengthens the synaptic connections between brain cells, weaving fragile, short-term impressions into the sturdy tapestry of long-term memory. It is as if the brain is transferring files from a cluttered, temporary desktop to a vast, organized archival system. Then comes the phase of REM sleep, the realm of vivid dreams. Here, the process becomes more associative, even creative. The brain begins to connect these newly consolidated memories with older, seemingly unrelated ones. A fact learned today might be woven into a narrative from last year, creating a richer, more interconnected web of knowledge. To be sleep-deprived is to interrupt this essential workflow. The information remains stuck in a transient state, vulnerable to being overwritten by the new data of the following day, like a message scrawled on a beach at low tide, destined to be erased by the incoming waves. But if this is the mechanical truth, a function of biology, why does it feel so deeply intuitive, as if we have always known this secret on some primal level? Long before the invention of the electroencephalogram, humanity sensed the profound relationship between sleep, dreams, and memory. In many indigenous cultures across the globe, the dream world was not an escape from reality, but a parallel dimension where true learning and communication occurred. For a young apprentice learning the intricate patterns of a sacred tapestry, or a hunter in training memorizing the subtle signs of animal tracks. The process was not complete with mere practice. It often culminated in a ritualistic period of sleep or meditative trance. The belief was that during this state the knowledge would be received not just from the waking teacher, but from the ancestors themselves, the wisdom of the past flowing into the mind of the present. They understood that the conscious mind, for all its power, could become saturated, like a sponge that can hold no more water. Sleep was the act of wringing out that sponge, allowing it to absorb again, but also allowing the patterns of the water to settle into its very fibers. These ancient practices were not mere superstition. They were an empirical observation of a truth we have only recently begun to quantify with data and graphs. They recognized that memory consolidation required a surrender, a passive state of reception that active daytime focus could not provide. So, if our ancestors and our science agree on the necessity of this nocturnal ritual, why does our modern world treat it with such casual disregard? We now live in a society that often wears sleep deprivation as a badge of honor, a symbol of dedication and ambition. The 8-hour night is frequently sacrificed on the altars of productivity and connectivity. Yet research consistently demonstrates a powerful, almost paradoxical efficiency. Studying for just 15 minutes before sleep can yield greater retention than an hour of cramming in the middle of the afternoon. The brain, it seems, is eager to perform its archival duties on the most recent deliveries, but when we deny it the time and the undisturbed peace to do so, we create a traffic jam of memories. Experiences, facts, and skills pile up in the short-term holding area, never making the journey to permanent storage. They become fragile, easily displaced, leading to the frustrating sensation of knowing that you know something, but being unable to access it. Our culture, in its relentless pursuit of more waking hours, is inadvertently engineering a collective amnesia, a state where our experiences are perpetually on the verge of being lost. We are creating a world of ghosts in the neural machine, impressions that flicker without substance. But if sleep is the universal key, why does its power seem so unevenly distributed? A counterpoint naturally emerges from the shadows of this narrative. We all know someone who thrives on minimal sleep, their memory seemingly sharp as a tack. Conversely, there are those who religiously get their 8 hours yet still struggle with forgetfulness. This variation whispers that the story is more complex than a simple equation of hours slept equals memories saved. Sleep provides the stage, but it does not write the entire play. The brain is not a passive, impartial archivist. It is a discerning curator with its own priorities. It does not save every scrap of information with equal fidelity. So, what then determines which memories are deemed worthy of preservation, selected for that sacred journey from the temporary to the permanent? The answer may lie not in the cold mechanics of synaptic consolidation, but in the warm, primal language of emotion. A memory tagged with a strong emotional charge, whether of fear, joy, surprise, or pain, is given a special priority tag in the brain's processing queue. It is as if the brain, in its ancient wisdom, understands that what feels important is important for survival. This selective process hints at a deeper truth. Our memory is not a perfect recording of our past. It is a curated museum, an ever-shifting narrative, where the exhibits are chosen not for their factual accuracy, but for their emotional resonance and perceived significance to the ongoing story of the self. The brain doesn't just save, it sculpts. And if emotion is the chisel, what does it mean that one particular emotion, a dark and urgent one, seems to leave the deepest and most enduring marks on the marble of our minds? What happens when the curator has a bias, when the archives are disproportionately filled with the records of our storms, while the ledgers of our sunshine grow faint with time? You can forget the birthday party from last year, the taste of the cake, the chorus of laughter, but you remember with unnerving clarity the interview from 5 years ago that ended in rejection, the exact shade of the interviewer's dismissive gaze, the specific clipped tone of the final "we'll be in touch," the heat in your cheeks as you stepped out into the indifferent afternoon. These negative memories, they refuse to fade. They are etched into the neural pathways of the mind with a permanence that joy seems to lack. This is not a flaw in your personal design, a tendency toward melancholy. It is perhaps an ancient inheritance, a whisper from a time when forgetting a threat meant you might not live to remember anything else. The architecture of this phenomenon is rooted deep within the biological cradle of our brains. When faced with a stimulus that registers as a threat, be it a predator's shadow or a social slight, our internal alarm system screams to life. The amygdala, two almond-shaped clusters of neurons that serve as the brain's emotional sentinels, trigger a cascade of stress hormones, chief among them cortisol. This chemical is not merely the agent of a racing heart and sweaty palms. It is a highlighter, a potent ink for the pages of memory. Cortisol essentially commands the hippocampus, the brain's chief librarian for factual and episodic memory, to prioritize this event. This is important, it signals. File it under survival. The memory is not just stored, it is branded with the searing heat of the emotion that accompanied it. The goal is simple, brutal, and elegant. Learn to avoid a repetition of this moment. A forgotten pleasure is a missed opportunity, but a forgotten danger could be the final chapter. So the brain, in its primal wisdom, makes a bargain. It trades a perfect record of happiness for a detailed ledger of near misses and pains. Is this ledger, then, the true biography of a life, or merely its safety manual? This biological imperative finds a powerful echo in the grand, unwritten archives of human history. Before written language, our stories were our survival guides. The elder of a tribe did not begin a tale with, "Let me tell you about the wonderfully abundant harvest we had." The narrative that gripped the circle around the fire, that held the children in rapt attention, began with, "Let me tell you about the winter we almost starved," or the time the rival clan attacked from the north, and how we narrowly escaped. These collective memories of hardship, of famine, of plague and conflict were not recounted to dwell in misery. They were vital data. The pain encoded within them was the lesson itself, a vaccine against future catastrophe for the entire community. The storyteller was not a pessimist, but a pragmatic archivist of peril, ensuring that the trauma of one generation could become the wisdom of the next. The memory of a failure was a scar that taught the body how to move to avoid the next blade. But what happens when the battles change and the scars outlive their lessons? In our modern world, the saber-toothed tiger has been replaced by the stinging email, the territorial rival by the disapproving colleague. Yet, the ancient machinery of our minds continues to operate on its original programming. A single piece of criticism in a sea of praise can dominate our thoughts for days. A minor social gaffe, replaying on a loop long after the event, while a dozen successful interactions fade into a pleasant blur. The brain still interprets these social and emotional threats through the same primal lens, prioritizing them for storage. The potential for public shame, for rejection, for failure, these are the modern equivalents of existential dangers. Our amygdala, ever vigilant, cannot distinguish between a threat to our life and a threat to our ego. Both register as perils to be remembered, to be analyzed, to be avoided at all costs. This system, so finely tuned for physical survival, now curates a gallery of our most potent anxieties. Are we, then, haunted not by ghosts, but by an overzealous guardian? This leads to a troubling paradox. If our minds are so adept at clinging to the negative, if the ledger of pain is so meticulously maintained, how do we avoid being crushed by the weight of it? Wouldn't such a design inevitably lead to a state of perpetual anxiety, a kind of emotional paralysis? Is the brain, in its quest to protect us, actually engineering its own unhappiness? This seems like a profound glitch in the system, a self-inflicted wound. Yet nature rarely creates systems without balance. Perhaps the very persistence of these memories is not the problem, but a challenge, an invitation to engage with them differently. The memory is not the event itself, but our ongoing relationship with it. It is a story we tell ourselves, and stories can be edited, their emphasis shifted, their meaning reinterpreted. the question then transforms. It ceases to be merely, why? We remember the bad so vividly and become something far more active, far more human. Is there a way to rewrite the narrative? Can we take the raw, painful data branded into our neurons and, through the slow, deliberate work of reflection and understanding, transmute it? Can the memory of a humiliating failure become the foundation for a later, hard-won resilience? Can the ghost of a past grief be consulted not as a tormentor, but as a teacher who speaks in the language of loss? This is not about erasure, which may be impossible, but about integration. It is the alchemy of experience, the attempt to turn the lead of trauma into the gold of wisdom. The memory remains, a fossil in the sedimentary layers of the self. But do we see it only as evidence of a long-past catastrophe, or can we learn to read in its contours the shape of the strength that was forged in its aftermath? The scar tissue is tougher than the original skin. Does it only represent a wound, or does it also map a survival? This process of reinterpretation hints at a deeper truth about memory's fundamental nature. If memory is not a perfect record, but a curated collection of survival guides, then its purpose is not fidelity, but function. It is less about accurately recording the past and more about effectively navigating the future. What if the very act of remembering is not a retrieval, but a reconstruction, each time shaped by the person we have become? The memory of that failed interview 5 years ago is not a pristine video file. It is a living thing, touched by every success and failure that came after it. Its sting may have softened, replaced by a wry acknowledgement of a necessary stepping stone, or its lesson may have sharpened, guiding a crucial decision. The memory is not the past imprisoned in the mind. It is a tool the mind uses to build the next moment. And if a tool can be repurposed, then perhaps a memory can be too. But what does it mean then, when the tool itself is shaped by the hand that uses it? If memory is for survival, and not for record-keeping, what happens to the truth of what was? Imagine a prehistoric hunter, his hands moving with an unthinking certainty. He remembers the precise angle to hold a flint, the exact pressure needed to flake a sharp edge, the subtle sound of a twig under tension in a snare. He was never given a manual. No one explained the physics of leverage or the chemistry of combustion. He simply remembers the doing. The memory is etched not in words, but in the muscles of his hands, the scent of damp earth, the visceral thrill of success. Now picture a modern student in a silent library, eyes scanning a dense paragraph on cellular mitosis. They can recite the stages, label the diagrams, and pass the exam with flying colors. Yet, a month later, the knowledge has evaporated, leaving behind only a faint residue, like a ghost in the attic of the mind. This is the fundamental paradox of memory. We treat it as a recording device, a biological hard drive meant for faithful storage. But evolution had a different, far more urgent purpose. Memory is not for recording. It is for survival. Our brain is not a passive librarian, meticulously cataloging every piece of information that enters through our senses. It is a ruthless editor in a chaotic newsroom, a survival engine constantly making split-second decisions about what is worth keeping. Its primary design is not to archive the world, but to navigate it successfully. It retains only that which increases our chances of living, of repeating a success, or of avoiding a threat. The hunter's memory of flint knapping is solid because it directly led to food, to tools, to life. The student's memory of mitosis is fragile because, in the immediate calculus of survival, it has no tangible outcome. It is a piece of data disconnected from action, from consequence, from the raw pulse of being. The brain, in its ancient wisdom, asks a simple, brutal question. Did this information help you live today? If the answer is no, the memory is tagged for disposal. This principle is written in the oldest layers of human history, long before the invention of writing. For our ancestors, memory was inseparable from action, ritual, and sensory experience. They did not need to remember the abstract concept of oxidation. They needed to remember the feeling of dry tinder, the specific technique of spinning a stick between their palms, the sight of the first wisp of smoke. Knowledge was procedural, embedded in the body. A potter remembered the consistency of clay not by a formula, but by the resistance it offered to her fingers. A navigator remembered the stars not as celestial objects, but as a map felt in the bones, guided by the rhythm of the waves and the taste of the wind. Memory was a dance between the individual and their environment, a continuous loop of trial and error where success was remembered with the body's whole intelligence and failure was remembered with a jolt of fear that ensured it would not be repeated. The memory was the action itself. Then we invented society, and with it, a new kind of knowledge. We built libraries and lecture halls, separating information from the immediate context of survival. Today, we learn to be tested. We memorize to present, not to act. We accumulate vast archives of disembodied facts, dates of treaties, rules of grammar, mathematical theorems that hold no direct bearing on whether we find food or avoid predators. This academic memory is a magnificent, unnatural feat, but it is also profoundly fragile. Without the anchor of experience, without the emotional charge of success or failure, these memories are like seeds scattered on stone. They may sprout briefly under the forced heat of an exam, but they lack the deep roots needed to survive. The brain, still operating on its ancient survival software, struggles to find a reason to keep them. Is this why we forget so easily what we merely studied, yet remember with perfect clarity the song that was playing during our first kiss, or the exact words of a childhood reprimand? Because those moments, charged with emotion, are interpreted by the ancient brain as significant, as events that shaped our social survival. This leads to a troubling, almost heretical question. Does our brain, in its relentless efficiency, consider most theoretical knowledge to be clutter? Are we fighting against our own biology when we try to stockpile facts that have no immediate survival utility? If the system is designed to prioritize the essential, then what is the fate of the merely interesting? The answer is not to abandon abstract thought, but to learn its language. To make knowledge memorable, we must trick our ancient brain into believing it matters for survival. We must re-embed information into the fabric of experience. We must attach it to emotion, to narrative, to personal meaning. A dry historical fact becomes unforgettable when it is woven into the story of a single soldier's fear. A complex scientific principle clicks into place when it is discovered through the hands in an experiment that either succeeds with a satisfying result or fails with a palpable consequence. The transition from memorizing to truly remembering is the journey from the abstract to the embodied. It is the act of taking the seed of an idea and planting it in the rich soil of personal relevance. But if this is the key, if memory truly flourishes when it is tied to the raw, unfiltered data of experience, then we must confront a fascinating corollary. What happens in a mind that has not yet learned to filter, to prioritize, to dismiss? What of the mind that experiences the world as a continuous, overwhelming flood of detail, where every color, every sound, every trivial event is granted equal weight? This is the world of the child, a realm where the ruthless editor has not yet taken the helm, and where memory operates on a different, almost magical set of rules. For a child, there is no distinction between essential and non-essential information. The precise shade of blue of a favorite toy car is as important as the route to the kitchen. The exact sequence of words in a bedtime story must be repeated without deviation, each syllable a sacred part of the ritual. They remember the specific pattern of cracks on the ceiling above their crib, the feel of a particular blanket, the quirky inflection in a parent's voice from a year ago. Their memory is not yet a curated gallery of survival tips. It is a vast, unedited documentary of being. They are not remembering for a purpose. They are remembering because they are fully, utterly present in the moment, absorbing the world in all its chaotic, glorious detail. They are, in a sense, remembering everything. This raises a profound question about the very nature of forgetting. If a child's mind is so adept at capturing the minutiae of existence, what do we lose when we learn to forget? Is the maturation of memory not just a process of gaining efficiency, but also one of sacrificing a certain kind of intimacy with the world? A 4-year-old child can recall the exact color of every classmate's shirt on a Tuesday, the specific pattern of a ladybug that landed on the windowsill a month ago, or recite verbatim a picture book read to them just once. The world enters their mind not as a curated gallery of important facts, but as an overwhelming high-definition flood of sensory data. A few years later, that astonishing, almost photographic recall has faded, smoothed over like a footprint on a beach. What changes in the architecture of a growing brain to trade this raw, detailed perception for something else, something we call understanding? This temporary genius for detail is rooted in the very biology of a young brain. At birth, the human brain is a landscape of explosive potential, a dense forest of neurons frantically forging connections, synapses, at a rate that will never be matched again. This is a period of unparalleled neural exuberance. An infant's brain is not a finely tuned filter, but a wide-open gate. Every sensation, every sound, every flicker of light is granted a temporary visa into the halls of memory. There is no efficient secretary yet stationed at the door, deciding which inputs are important and which are trivial noise. The brain has not yet learned the art of forgetting. This is not a flaw, but a feature. How else could a mind learn the subtle grammar of a human language, the complex map of social cues, the physical laws of a world where gravity is a new and startling discovery? The brain, in its wisdom, samples everything, storing vast libraries of raw experience before it learns the dewy decimal system of adult cognition. It is a sponge, absorbing the ocean because it does not yet know how to drink. But what is the cost of drinking from the fire hose of existence? If we could step back through time, we might see the evolutionary logic of this design. In the societies of our distant ancestors, a child's survival depended on acute, immediate observation. Learning was not a scheduled activity, but a constant, immersive process. A child would watch the way an adult's hand gripped a spear, the specific angle needed to skin an animal, the subtle signs of a change in the weather, or the dangerous shape of a predator's track. They learned through mimicry and play, their brains acting as high-fidelity recording devices, capturing countless details of their environment. This wealth of sensory and procedural memory was the raw material from which wisdom would later be sculpted. The brain's subsequent pruning, the strategic elimination of weaker neural connections, is not a loss of ability, but a shift in strategy. The goal moves from collecting data to building a model of the world. Is the transition from data collector to model builder the very definition of growing up? This ancient legacy plays out in curious ways within the modern world. A child can remember the intricate plot of a cartoon series with flawless accuracy, yet consistently forget to turn off the bathroom light. They can recite the lyrics to a dozen pop songs, but seem unable to recall a simple instruction like putting their shoes away. This is not a failure of memory, but a reflection of its priorities. The child's brain is still tuned to the captivating narrative, the striking image, the emotionally charged event. The mundane, repetitive command lacks the salience to easily find a permanent home. The memory system is not broken. Its criteria for what deserves preservation are simply different, shaped by a deeper, more ancient set of values where novelty and potential threat or reward trump routine. Does this mean that what we call forgetfulness is often just a disagreement between our modern demands and our ancient neural wiring? This leads to a paradox. If young children possess such a powerful, indiscriminate memory, why do so many struggle in formal educational settings? Why do they forget the very facts and figures we so diligently try to impart? The answer may lie in the difference between recording and retrieving. A child's brain may be recording a staggering amount of information, but without the proper cues, the hooks of emotion, context, and personal relevance, retrieving a specific, abstract fact on command can be nearly impossible. The memory is there, like a book in a vast, unorganized library, Schooling, at its best, is not about stuffing more books into the library, but about teaching the child how to build the shelves and create the cataloging system. It is the process of moving from a warehouse of details to a curated museum of knowledge. But what happens when the curation process goes awry? When the librarian, instead of organizing, begins to discard the books themselves? This brings us to a haunting and profound mirror image of childhood's memory, the journey of Alzheimer's disease. Here, the brain's carefully constructed filing system begins to collapse, but not randomly. The process often seems to reverse the order of acquisition. Recent memories, what one had for breakfast, the name of a grandchild, dissolve first, like ink fading in the sun. Yet memories from the distant past, from childhood and early adulthood, can remain, etched with startling clarity. The individual may not know what year it is, but can describe the smell of their mother's kitchen or the tune of a song from their youth with perfect detail. It is as if the disease strips away the layers of memory in reverse order, exposing the deepest, most foundational strata of the self. The most profound memories, those soaked in emotion and repeated over a lifetime, appear to be the most resilient. They are the last islands to disappear beneath the rising tide of forgetting. This suggests that our earliest memories are not merely stored. They are the bedrock upon which our identity is built, the foundational narratives that shape our understanding of who we are. If our newest memories are the leaves and branches easily shaken loose by the storm of disease, are our oldest memories the roots, clinging tenaciously to the earth of our being. This eerie symmetry between the beginning and the end of life raises an unsettling question. The child's brain, in its initial state, lacks a filter, and the Alzheimer's afflicted brain loses its filter. Both exist in a state where the present is elusive, one because it has not yet learned to prioritize it, the other because it can no longer hold on to it. Both are drawn to the vivid, emotional, and deeply ingrained. So is the journey of a human mind, then, a temporary departure from a state of raw, detailed perception, a long middle age of organized forgetting, only to potentially return to a different kind of unfiltered reality at the end? What does it mean that our cognitive life may be a bell curve, where the peaks of detailed, less filtered experience exist not at the height of our adult powers but at its very edges? And if our earliest memories form the core of our identity, a core that can outlast the ravages of a disease that destroys nearly everything else, then what does that tell us about what we truly are, beneath the layers of experience and accomplishment we accumulate over a lifetime? Is the self, in the end, just a story we first started telling ourselves in childhood, a story so fundamental that even when we forget how to tell it, its echoes remain? She doesn't remember your name. The face before her, a landscape of familiar love to you, is to her a pleasant but unplaceable vista. She cannot recall what she ate for breakfast, or if she even had breakfast at all. The recent past is a shoreline constantly erased by a rising tide. Yet, when a melody from her youth drifts through the room, a quiet miracle occurs. Her eyes, often clouded with a soft confusion, suddenly clear. A faint smile touches her lips, and she begins to hum, the notes emerging not as a struggle, but as a river finding its old, familiar course. The lyrics, lost to decades of conscious recollection, return with a fluency that defies the ruin of the present. Why is it that the oldest memories, the ones etched in the distant past, prove so stubbornly resilient, while the memories of this morning vanish like mist? This is the peculiar, heart-wrenching paradox of Alzheimer's disease. It is not a simple erasure, a uniform fading to black. It is a journey in reverse, a slow, unwinding walk back through the corridors of a life, where the doors to the most recent rooms are locked first, while those at the far end, the chambers of youth and early adulthood, remain ajar the longest. The mind, in its retreat, seems to be seeking its point of origin, returning to the memories that formed the bedrock of the self. This backward pilgrimage suggests that our memory is not a single, monolithic library, but a layered city, built over generations, with some foundations dug far deeper than others. The map of this regression is drawn in the biology of the brain itself. Alzheimer's disease is a physical sculptor, one that works with a cruel and precise chisel. Its primary target is often the hippocampus, a small, seahorse-shaped structure buried deep within the temporal lobes. Think of the hippocampus as the bustling port of a great city. It is here that new experiences, the face of a grandchild, the taste of a meal, the plot of a book, first make landfall. It is the gateway where short-term impressions are processed, tagged with emotional and contextual details, and prepared for long-term storage elsewhere in the brain, the vast cerebral cortex. But as the disease progresses, this port is besieged. The neural connections are severed, the docks fall into disrepair, new shipments can no longer be reliably unloaded, they are lost at sea. This is why the recent past becomes so elusive. Yet the older memories, the ones formed decades ago, have already completed their journey. They are not stored in the vulnerable port of the hippocampus. Through countless repetitions and the intense heat of strong emotion, these memories have been consolidated. They have been transported inland to the sprawling, distributed networks of the cerebral cortex. They are not kept in one single warehouse, but are broken down and stored as patterns. A scent in one neighborhood, a melody in another, a feeling of warmth in a third. To lose them entirely, the disease would have to lay waste to the entire city, a process that takes far longer and is often incomplete. So, the song from a first dance, the recipe learned at a mother's knee, the fear of a wartime siren. These deeply engraved narratives remain, like ancient monuments standing long after the modern buildings have crumbled. Is the self, then, not a single story, but a collection of artifacts, with the oldest ones being the most durable? This biological unspooling finds a curious echo in the broader tapestry of human history. Long before modern medicine gave us the terms hippocampus and amyloid plaques, we observed this same backward journey in our elders. In traditional communities, where life was woven tightly with ritual and oral history, the oldest members would often dwell in the vivid landscapes of their youth. They could recount the intricate details of a harvest festival 70 years past, the name of a first love, the specific texture of a childhood hardship. Yet they might struggle to remember the name of a newborn great-grandchild. Their memories, like treasures, were those that had been handled most often. The stories told and retold at gatherings, the songs sung at every wedding and funeral, the lessons learned through profound loss or joy. These were not just recollections, they were the very currency of identity and social continuity. They were reinforced with each telling, their neural pathways worn deep and smooth, like ancient footpaths through a forest. Does the act of communal storytelling, then, serve as a kind of cognitive fortification, a way of anchoring our most vital memories against the inevitable erosion of time? In our modern world, we have stumbled upon a way to tap into this ancient resilience, not through ritual, but through therapy. Music therapy for Alzheimer's patients offers some of the most poignant glimpses into this preserved inner world. When a patient, seemingly adrift in a fog of the present, is played a song from their formative years, a swing tune from the 1940s, a rock and roll hit from the 1960s, a transformation occurs. It is as if a hidden switch has been flipped. The music bypasses the damaged cognitive gates. It travels directly along the deep, well-paved roads of the auditory and emotional brain. For a few minutes, the fog lifts. They sing. They tap their feet. They might even turn and share a fragment of a story, a clear, coherent memory triggered by the sound. In that moment, they are not patients. They are teenagers again, listening to that song on a crackling radio, feeling the hopes and anxieties of a life yet to be lived. This is not merely nostalgia. It is a neurological event, a temporary reassembly of a self thought to be lost. What does it say about our identity if it can be so powerfully, if briefly, summoned by a simple sequence of notes and chords? Yet this revelation brings with it a profound and troubling counterpoint. If these deep memories still exist, woven into the very fabric of the cortex, why are they so maddeningly inaccessible outside of these fleeting, triggered moments? Why can we not, with conscious effort, walk back into those well-preserved rooms and dwell there? It suggests a fundamental disconnect between the storage of memory and the mechanism of retrieval. The disease appears to have dismantled the index, the cataloging system that allows the conscious mind to call up a specific file at will. The memories are there, like books in a vast, dark library, but the lights have been turned off, and the librarian has gone home. We are left to stumble through the stacks, occasionally brushing against a volume that by chance falls into our hands. This leads to a haunting question. Is our ability to actively recall and narrate our own pasts the true essence of memory, or is it merely the tip of an immense iceberg, most of which remains submerged and silent, felt only in our instincts, our moods, and our unexplained affinities? This question inevitably spirals into a more powerful, almost mystical hypothesis. The stubborn persistence of a childhood song, the visceral clarity of a long-forgotten fear that surfaces in a dream. These fragments hint that each of us carries within a vast, hidden archive. It is a repository, not just of our conscious experiences, but of sensations, impressions, and emotional tones from our earliest years, even from a time before language. This is the deep memory that Alzheimer's, in its cruel backward march, seems to inadvertently reveal. The disease strips away the sophisticated, recently acquired layers of the self, the complex adult with plans and responsibilities, and what is left is something more fundamental, more raw. It is the emotional and sensory core of who we are. Could it be that we are all curators of a museum we have never fully toured, holding on to stories that even we do not know we are keeping? And if the architecture of our own minds can become a foreign land, what happens when we begin to outsource the very function of memory to external devices? When the fragile biological library within is supplemented by the perfect searchable archive of a machine, does the act of remembering itself begin to change? You no longer need to remember a phone number, the way to a new cafe, or your niece's birthday. Your phone holds the numbers, the map charts the course, and a notification will chime with a gentle, insistent reminder. This liberation from the mundane work of remembering feels like a final, hard-won victory. Yet, in this quiet emancipation, a smaller, more personal loss occurs. You find yourself standing in your own hallway, keys vanished from your mind, grasping at a mental emptiness where a simple fact should reside. Is this the price of convenience? Or is it something more profound? A subtle biological negotiation where the brain, in its ruthless efficiency, begins to outsource the very functions that once defined its agility? Is the mind, in the absence of constant exercise, quietly simplifying itself, trading depth for ease? The human brain operates on a fundamental, almost brutal principle: use it or lose it. This is not a metaphor but a biological reality etched into the folds of our cortex and the intricate circuitry of our hippocampus. This seahorse-shaped region, buried deep within the temporal lobe, is the cartographer of our personal world, meticulously drawing cognitive maps of our surroundings and weaving the threads of experience into the tapestry of episodic memory. Every time we navigate a route from memory, recall a list without a digital aid, or reconstruct the events of a day, we are not merely accessing a file. We are conducting a symphony of neural activity, strengthening synaptic pathways, and reinforcing the very structures that make memory possible. It is a form of cognitive weightlifting. When technology assumes these tasks, when a GPS dictates every turn, when a search engine instantly provides a fact we might have struggled to recall, the hippocampus is relieved of its duty. The neural pathways once dedicated to spatial reasoning and sequential recall, like unused trails in a forest, begin to fade, overgrown with disuse. This is not degeneration in the sense of a disease, but a quiet adaptation. The brain, ever the pragmatic organ, reallocates its precious resources. If it no longer needs to be a vast library of facts and roots, perhaps it can become something else. But what is the cost of this repurposing? When we no longer exercise the muscle of memory, do we risk losing not just the skill, but the unique, embodied understanding that comes from the struggle to remember? The memory formed through effort is a rich, multisensory experience. The fact retrieved from a device is a sterile piece of data. Are we trading the textured landscape of personal recollection for a smooth, featureless plane of information? This anxiety that a new tool might atrophy an ancient human capacity is itself an ancient story. Over 2 millennia ago, in the sun-drenched agora of Athens, Socrates voiced a deep suspicion towards the new technology of his time, writing. He argued, as recounted by Plato, that writing would implant forgetfulness into men's souls. If they could simply write things down, they would cease to exercise their intrinsic memory, relying on external marks instead of the living knowledge within. He feared it would create the illusion of wisdom, not its reality. In a sense, Socrates was correct, but his prophecy was incomplete. Humanity did indeed shift from a culture of prodigious oral memory to one of written record. The great bards who recited epic poems from memory were replaced by scribes and scholars. But the mind did not wither, it transformed. It was freed from the immense burden of rote preservation and could turn its energies toward higher-order analysis, critique, and creativity. The written word became a new kind of memory, a shared external hard drive for civilization. Today's technological shift is different not in kind, but in velocity and intimacy. The smartphone is not a scroll in a library. It is a cognitive prosthesis fused to our hand, an always-on extension of our own mind. The pace of change is so rapid that our biology has no time to adapt in the slow generational way it once did. Yet the lesson from history remains. A new tool does not merely replace an old function, it redefines the entire ecosystem of thought. If writing changed us from rememberers to readers and writers, what are our digital companions turning us into? Are we becoming curators of external data streams rather than cultivators of internal landscapes? The fabric of modern society is now woven with this digital thread of externalized memory. Our short-term memory, that fleeting workspace of the conscious mind, has grown lazy. Why memorize a shopping list when it can be dictated to a device? Why remember a meeting time when a calendar alert will jolt us into action? This constant offloading feels effortless, but it may be eroding our capacity for deep, sustained focus. The mind, unaccustomed to the strain of holding information, becomes more susceptible to distraction, flitting from one notification to the next. Our memories become rented rather than owned. They reside on corporate servers, in cloud-based albums, and within algorithmic timelines. The consequence is a subtle but pervasive loss of agency. A photograph taken on a phone is often glanced at and forgotten, whereas the mental effort of capturing a scene without a camera, the effort to truly see and remember, forges a deeper, more personal impression. When we outsource the curation of our past to algorithms that highlight memories from a year ago, are we relinquishing control over our own narrative? Is the story of our lives becoming a product assembled by code, a highlight reel selected for its engagement potential rather than its personal significance? The feeling of nostalgia itself changes. It becomes less a spontaneous Proustian flood triggered by an internal cue and more a passive consumption of a digital slideshow. And yet, to cast technology solely as the villain in this story is to ignore its profound capacity for preservation. For every forgotten set of keys, there is a digital photograph that captures the fleeting smile of a child with a clarity no biological memory could ever sustain. For every atrophied neural pathway for navigation, there is a meticulously logged journal entry, a health dataset that reveals a life-saving pattern, a video of a loved one's voice that would have otherwise faded into the quiet static of time. This artificial memory is vast, precise, and seemingly permanent. It offers a bulwark against the natural entropy of the mind, against the gentle, necessary forgetting that smooths the rough edges of pain and loss. So, the question is not whether artificial memory is good or bad, but whether it can truly compensate for the unique qualities of biological memory. Is a terabyte of photos an adequate substitute for the rich, emotional, and often flawed tapestry of lived recall? Can an external record, no matter how detailed, ever replicate the feeling of a memory being yours, a part of your neural fabric, changed and colored by every subsequent experience? The two seem to serve different masters. One aims for perfect fidelity, the other for personal meaning. This brings us to a threshold, a point where the very definition of memory is changing. Memory is no longer a solitary act confined within the bony vault of a single skull. It has become a distributed process, a collaboration between a biological brain and a digital ecosystem. Our minds are now nodes in a vast network of storage and retrieval. The act of remembering is often an act of searching, the act of forgetting, a failure of backup. This shifts the fundamental question from the individual to the collective, from the biological to the socio-technical. If our memories are co-created and held in trust by machines, then who are we, the rememberers? When remembering and forgetting are no longer purely personal, intimate processes, but are shaped by the architectures and incentives of the digital world, what becomes of the self that is built upon them? Is the person who relies on a digital brain to remember their life the same as the person who relies on a biological one? And if this externalization of memory is a form of evolution, what of those who cannot partake in it? Those for whom the internal world remains the primary library? What of the individual whose mind does not forget, for whom every memory is preserved with unbearable, perfect clarity? She remembers the taste of the air on a Tuesday afternoon in October 1997. The specific weight of the wool sweater she wore, the way the light cut a diagonal slash across the kitchen floor, the exact sequence of words exchanged during a phone call that held no particular importance. For her, time is not a river that erodes the past, but a vast, meticulously organized library where every single day of her life remains on the shelf, its contents perfectly preserved. This is hyperthymesia, or highly superior autobiographical memory, a condition that sounds on its surface like the ultimate superpower: to never forget a face, a fact, a feeling, to hold the entirety of one's personal history in the palm of the mind. Yet, as we step into her world, we begin to see the contours of a different reality. The perfect memory is not a gift, but a cage. The library has no exits, and every volume, no matter how painful or trivial, is permanently checked out. The architecture of such a mind is a marvel of biological engineering gone awry. Hyperthymesia is a rare neurological phenomenon, a quirk in the intricate wiring of the brain's deepest memory centers. It is not a matter of trying harder or paying closer attention. It is a fundamental difference in how the brain processes experience. The key lies in the hyperactive dialogue between the amygdala, the seat of emotion, and the hippocampus, the brain's master archivist. In most of us, this partnership is a discerning editor. It sifts through the constant stream of sensory data, deciding what is worthy of long-term storage, the shock of a car accident, the warmth of a first kiss, and discarding the rest, the color of a stranger's shirt on the morning commute, the bland taste of yesterday's lunch. But in the hyperthymestic brain, the editor has been fired. The gates are thrown open. Every sensation, every fleeting thought, every mundane detail is stamped with the same emotional and contextual intensity and filed away with perfect fidelity. The brain does not filter. It hoards. It is a relentless, uncurated recording, a life lived twice, once in the moment and forever in the relentless replay. Is the essence of a healthy mind, then, not what it remembers, but what it is allowed to forget? This biological anomaly forces us to reconsider the very purpose of memory from a historical perspective. There is no archaeological evidence to suggest that our ancient ancestors possessed such total recall. Their survival did not depend on remembering every single sunrise, but on remembering which berries were poisonous, where the fresh water flowed each spring, and the intricate social alliances that held the tribe together. They developed a collective, selective memory, a shared hard drive of crucial information passed down through stories and rituals. The individual who remembered everything, from a personal slight to the exact shape of a cloud on the day of a hunt, might have been a liability, paralyzed by an overload of irrelevant data. For early humans, forgetting was as vital as remembering. It allowed for forgiveness, for adaptation, for the emotional flexibility required to face a new day, unburdened by the accumulated grief and grievances of all the days before. Their history was not a perfect record, but a curated narrative, a story that shaped their identity. If our collective past is a story we tell ourselves, what happens when the story becomes an unedited, overwhelming data stream? In our modern world, the burden of the hyperthymestic individual becomes starkly clear. They are often haunted, not blessed. A forgotten argument for most people is, for them, an eternal, open wound. They can relive the shame of a childhood mistake with the same visceral intensity decades later. The brain's defense mechanism, the gentle fading of painful memories, the sanding down of sharp emotional edges, is absent. This can lead to chronic stress, anxiety, and a form of emotional paralysis as they are constantly navigating a present crowded with the uninvited ghosts of the past. Their perfect memory becomes a club to beat themselves with, a prison of their own experiences. In this light, our own fallible memories, with their gaps and distortions, appear not as flaws, but as sophisticated survival tools. They are a protective barrier, a psychological immune system that allows us to heal, to learn, and to move forward. Is forgetting, then, the very mechanism that makes emotional growth and resilience possible? But a counter-argument whispers from the corners of our ambition. What if we could remember more? Imagine the student who never forgets a formula, the doctor who recalls every case study, the engineer who holds entire schematics in her mind. Wouldn't such efficiency propel us to new heights of intelligence and productivity? The allure of a perfect memory is the allure of absolute control over our own minds, a victory over the frustrating fragility of human recall. It promises a life free from the embarrassment of a forgotten name, the anxiety of a lost fact before an exam, the slow erosion of cherished moments. In a society that prizes information above all, the hyperthymestic mind seems like the ultimate optimized machine. But this is a seductive illusion. The problem is not the quantity of memory, but the quality of its selection. A library with every book ever printed, including millions of irrelevant pamphlets and grocery lists, is not a useful library. It is a chaotic warehouse where the truly valuable texts are impossible to find. The hyperthymestic individual is drowning in data but may be starving for wisdom. Their mind is a vast, undifferentiated landscape where a profound personal loss holds the same weight as the memory of a television jingle. So, if the value of memory lies not in its volume but in its curation, what then determines which memories are deemed worthy of preservation? What is the hidden algorithm of the mind that elevates one moment to significance and lets another slip into oblivion? This question lingers, unresolved, as we turn our gaze from the internal world of a single human mind to the broader tapestry of life on Earth. If our own memory is a selective and often unreliable narrator, how does it compare to the memories of the other beings with whom we share this planet? The pigeon, dismissed as a simple city dweller, possesses a homing ability that relies on a spatial memory so precise it can navigate hundreds of miles back to its loft. The whale sings a song that evolves over seasons, a cultural memory passed through the ocean's depths. The scrub jay remembers not just the location of thousands of food caches, but what it hid in each one, and when, a feat of what, where, when memory once thought to be uniquely human. These creatures do not remember their lives as a continuous autobiographical narrative. Their memories are specialized, honed by evolution for specific tasks, finding food, migrating, recognizing social rivals. In many ways, their memory mirrors that of our ancient ancestors, not a total recall of the self, but a brilliant fragmented mosaic of survival-critical information. They remember what they need to, and forget the rest. So, in the grand scheme of remembering, who truly remembers better? The woman who can recall every day of her life, or the whale that remembers the ancient migratory path of its pod? A pigeon can fly thousands of miles across unfamiliar continents and return to the precise ledge of a specific city building where it was born. A salmon, after years of navigating the vast, featureless ocean, can find its way back to the exact freshwater stream of its origin, guided by a memory etched into its very cells. Meanwhile, you have just spent the last 3 minutes padding your pockets, trying to remember where you left your phone. This simple, everyday lapse feels like a profound failure next to the animal kingdom's epic feats of recollection. But is it? Or is it merely the signature of a different kind of mind, one that has traded an instinctual map of the physical world for something far more abstract and perhaps more powerful? The biological hardware of memory is not a uniform gift across species. It is a specialized tool, sharpened by evolution for survival in a particular niche. Creatures like pigeons, whales, and certain primates possess a spatial memory system that borders on the miraculous. Their brains are wired with an internal GPS of astonishing precision, allowing them to chart migrations that span the globe, recall the locations of thousands of hidden food caches, or recognize the subtle landmarks of a vast territory. This is a deep, ancestral memory, one that operates on a timescale of seasons and lifetimes. Yet, place one of these natural navigators in a laboratory test requiring them to remember an arbitrary shape they saw just seconds ago, and their performance often plummets. Their minds are not designed for holding transient, abstract facts. The brain, in these species, prioritizes the memory that matters most. The memory of place, of migratory paths, of predator and prey. It is a memory for existing within a landscape, not for analyzing it from a distance. The pigeon does not need to remember why. The sun's arc is a reliable compass. It only needs to know in its bones that it is. If we could travel back and peer into the minds of our prehistoric ancestors, we would likely find a memory landscape far closer to that of the pigeon or the salmon than to our own. Their survival depended on a similar intimate cartography of the real. They were masters of their physical domain, reading the environment with a fluency we have largely lost. They would remember not just a grove of fruit trees, but the particular tree that bore the sweetest fruit, the exact rock formation that offered shelter from the prevailing wind, the subtle bend in a river where fish gathered. Their memory was not a library of facts, but a living, three-dimensional map, rich with sensory detail and practical consequence. It was a memory of action and orientation, woven into the very act of living. A scratch on a stone was not a piece of data to be stored and recalled. It was a signpost, a warning, a story written in the landscape itself. For them, forgetting the route to a seasonal water source was not an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. Their recall was less about detail for detail's sake and more about the patterns that ensured continuity. Modern humanity has, in a sense, swapped places with the animal kingdom. We have outsourced our spatial memory to digital maps and GPS satellites, allowing that ancient neural circuitry to atrophy. In its place, we have cultivated a formidable capacity for abstract and symbolic memory. We remember passwords, email addresses, the convoluted plot lines of television series, and the logical steps of a complex argument. Our memory now serves a new kind of survival, social and technological. It navigates the intricate landscapes of information, professional networks, and digital identities. We have become less adept at finding our way through a forest, but unparalleled in our ability to traverse the abstract forest of data that defines modern life. This shift represents a fundamental reallocation of cognitive resources. The same mental energy a hunter-gatherer used to track prey is now used to track a project deadline. The memory that once stored the location of edible plants now stores the location of a crucial file on a cloud server. Is this a trade-up or a trade-off? Have we gained the world of information only to lose our sense of the world itself? Yet, here lies the paradox. Despite our apparent spatial amnesia, our species has come to dominate the planet. This simple fact forces us to reconsider the very definition of an optimal memory. Is it the pigeon's flawless recall of a single migratory route, perfected over millennia? Or is it the human's ability to learn, and then forget, 100 different routes, constantly updating and adapting to new environments and new challenges? The value of memory may not lie in its fidelity to past events, but in its flexibility for future application. Remembering every single detail of every single day could be a crippling burden, a cacophony of irrelevant data. Perhaps the genius of the human brain is not in what it remembers, but in what it chooses to forget, and more importantly, in what it generalizes. The ultimate advantage may not be a perfect record, but a useful model. This realization leads us to a higher understanding of memory's purpose. It is not merely a scrapbook of lived experience, a collection of discrete snapshots. Instead, memory is the primary tool our brain uses to construct something far more essential, an internal map of how the world works. We remember not the event, but the pattern it revealed. We forget the specific fall of the apple, but we remember the law of gravity it implied. Our memories are the raw materials from which we build a predictive model of reality, a personal guidebook that allows us to anticipate, to plan, to imagine futures that have not yet happened. The pigeon remembers the root home, but does it ever imagine a new home? So we are left not with an answer, but with a gateway. If memory is the architect of our inner world, the cartographer of our personal universe, then what is the nature of the map it draws? Is it a precise topographic chart or a more impressionistic painting, highlighting only the features that matter to the traveler? And if our past is not a fixed record but a constantly updated model, then who is the map maker and what is its true destination? You don't remember the exact words spoken in that meeting last week, the specific turn of phrase your colleague used, or the precise order of the agenda, yet you walked out with a crystal clear understanding. The air in the room was thick with unspoken tensions, a subtle chill in the usual warmth, a map of alliances and anxieties drawn in the space between handshakes and forced smiles. You knew, with a certainty that felt more like instinct than intellect, that something was fundamentally wrong. And you were right. That wasn't a simple memory. It was a map. This is the silent, ceaseless work of the human brain. It is not a meticulous archivist, dutifully filing away every fact and figure like some cosmic librarian. Instead, it is a cartographer of experience, an artist sketching the coastlines of reality not from perfect photographs, but from the blurred impressions of 1,000 voyages. Its primary function is not to record the world as it is, but to build a functional, predictive model of it, a map that allows us to navigate the uncertain terrain of the future using the surveyed lands of the past. We do not remember the event. We remember the pattern it carved into us. Deep within the folded cortex, a quiet network hums with activity when the outside world fades. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, a name that belies its profound purpose. It is the brain's internal storyteller, most active not when we are focused on a task, but when we are daydreaming, reflecting, or simply letting our minds wander. In this state, it is not idle. It is performing its most essential duty, weaving the threads of disparate memories into a coherent tapestry of meaning. It connects the frustration of a childhood game to the tension in a boardroom, the taste of a forgotten fruit to a feeling of home, the sound of rain to a sense of peace. This network is the loom on which the brain's map is woven. It takes the raw data of experience, the cold, hard facts of what happened, and transforms them into something far more useful, a model of how things tend to happen. This model is built on patterns, not pixels. The brain is an efficiency expert, ruthlessly compressing terabytes of sensory input into manageable files of cause and effect, of probability and expectation. It remembers not the exact shade of green of the predator's eyes, but the pattern of movement in the grass that preceded its attack. It discards the specific words of a warning to retain the emotional contour of the threat. This is why you can recognize a friend's silhouette from 100 yards away, or sense a shift in a relationship from a subtle change in tone. The map is not the territory. It is a guide to the territory's hidden laws. It is a living document, constantly updated, its borders redrawn with every new journey. But what is the evolutionary cradle from which this magnificent cartographer emerged? Long before written language, before cities or calendars, our ancestors survived by reading the world not as a collection of discrete events, but as a system of interconnected patterns. A hunter-gatherer did not need to recall every single hunt in perfect detail. There was no survival value in remembering the exact number of steps taken on a specific Tuesday 10 years ago. The value lay in constructing a model, a predictive map of behavior, climate, and risk. They learned that in the lean months of the dry season, the herds would migrate towards the last remaining water sources, tracing ancient paths invisible to the untrained eye. They remembered not each individual encounter with a rival tribe, but the pattern of their movements, the signs of their presence, the emotional geography of the land itself, where it felt safe and where danger lingered, like a scent on the wind. This was a map written in memory, song, and story, passed down through generations. It was a map of probabilities. It told you where you were likely to find food, but not that you certainly would. It indicated where danger might be lurking, but not that it always was. This cognitive leap, from recording facts to inferring patterns, was perhaps as crucial as the development of tools. It allowed for foresight. It transformed a reactive creature into a predictive one, able to plan, to strategize, to imagine futures that had not yet happened. The brain became a time traveler, using the map of the past to simulate possible tomorrows. The crackle of a fire wasn't just warmth. It was a node in a network of memories about predators avoiding flame, about community, about stories that shaped identity. The map was not just spatial. It was emotional, social, and deeply philosophical. It encoded values and fears as surely as it charted rivers and mountains. This ancient cartographer still lives within us, its methods refined, but its core purpose unchanged. The modern human navigating the concrete jungles and digital landscapes of the 21st century operates on the very same principle. We meet a new person, and in an instant, our brain constructs a preliminary map. We don't remember their every word, but we absorb the pattern of their speech, the warmth of their smile, the subtle cues in their body language. We leave with a feeling about them, a gut instinct that is nothing less than a complex, synthesized model based on a lifetime of social interactions. We start a new job, and within days we have an impression of the workplace culture. This is not a list of policies from the employee handbook. It is a map of power dynamics, unspoken rules, and emotional currents. We know which colleague is a safe harbor and which corridor feels tense, all without being able to point to a single, definitive event that proved it. We are constantly building these emotional and social maps, using them to navigate conversations, relationships, and careers. The atmosphere of a party, the vibe of a neighborhood, the lynch feeling about an investment, these are the outputs of our internal cartographer. They are the modern equivalents of the ancient hunter's sense for the land. Our brains are still drawing coastlines on the vast, uncharted seas of human experience, using the stars of past encounters as our guide. But what happens when the map becomes more real to us than the territory it represents? What are the costs of this brilliant, efficient system? For all its power, this reliance on pattern mapping carries a profound vulnerability. If we only remember the model and discard the original details, do we not risk living in a caricature of reality? The brain's elegant summaries can easily harden into prejudice. The map, once drawn, can become a cage. We meet one individual from a certain group who confirms a negative pattern, and our brain, eager for efficiency, may generalize, painting an entire community with the broad brush of a single, potentially misinterpreted experience. We remember the gist of an argument with a loved one, the anger, the hurt, but forget the specific, vulnerable words that might have held the key to reconciliation. The pattern becomes the prison, and we are left fighting a shadow instead of a person. This is the brain's tragic trade-off. In its quest to predict and protect, it can lead us to see threats where there are none, to misunderstand motives, to overlook the beautiful, complicating details that make life rich and surprising. We can become so adept at reading the map that we forget to look up at the ever-changing landscape. We mistake our internal model for external truth. The very tool that allows us to navigate complexity can, if left unchecked, blind us to the unique, the novel, the exception that breaks the rule? Is our confidence in our gut feeling sometimes just a confidence in our own biases, a faithfulness to an outdated or inaccurate map? This is the perpetual balancing act the brain must perform, a high wire act between the efficiency of the pattern and the fidelity of the detail. It is a choice between a quick, usable sketch and a painstakingly detailed portrait. The brain is always making this choice, prioritizing what is necessary for survival and well-being in the moment. But one cannot help but wonder, in our modern age of information saturation and relentless stimulation, which way the balance is tipping. Are we, in our frantic pace, forcing our internal cartographer to cut corners? Is the map becoming increasingly simplified, a cartoon version of a world too complex to fully capture? In outsourcing our memory to digital devices, in skimming headlines instead of reading articles, in consuming life in a blur of notifications and feeds, are we training our brains to value the pattern over the particulars, the summary over the substance? The ancient brain, forged in the slow, deliberate rhythms of nature, now must chart a world that moves at the speed of light. It is still using its old, powerful tools: pattern recognition, model building, predictive mapping. But the territory has changed beyond all recognition. So, we are left with a tentative observation, a single slice of a much deeper truth. The very machinery that allowed us to conquer the ancient world may be both our greatest asset and our most significant liability in the modern one. The mapmaker is powerful, but it is also fallible. And so we must ask, as the lines on our internal charts grow both sharper and more simplistic, what vital details are we no longer even seeing? What forgotten paths, what hidden springs of truth have been erased from the map forever? And in the quiet hum of our default mode, as it tirelessly weaves its stories, is it crafting a guide to reality or merely a more and more convincing illusion? You can still recall, with a clarity that feels almost tactile, the phone numbers of childhood friends, the exact route to a grandparent's house, the lyrics to songs you haven't heard in decades. Yet you now struggle to remember the last 4 digits of your own mobile number. This forgetting feels like a personal failure, a quiet betrayal by your own mind. It's a common anxiety of the modern age. Is our memory, that fundamental pillar of human experience, deteriorating? Are we, surrounded by more information than any generation before us, ironically becoming worse at remembering? The immediate visceral answer seems to be a resounding yes, but the deeper, more biological truth tells a different story. There is no compelling evidence that the innate, biological capacity of human memory has degraded. The hardware, the 3-pound universe inside our skulls, remains essentially unchanged from that of our ancestors who navigated by the stars and recited epic poems from heart. The same neural architecture, the same intricate dance of neurotransmitters that allowed them to map entire landscapes and recall complex social alliances is still present within us. The potential is undiminished. The change is not in the instrument, but in the score it is asked to play. We are not using our memory less. We are using it differently. We have not lost the ability to remember phone numbers. We have simply outsourced the task. This is the first, crucial layer of understanding. Our memory hasn't gotten worse. It has been redirected. To appreciate this shift, we must journey back to a time when memory was not a convenience, but a necessity for survival. Before the written word became ubiquitous, before libraries and smartphones, human knowledge lived and died in the minds of individuals. Bards were living repositories of history, law, and myth. Elders carried the precise knowledge of medicinal plants, animal migration patterns, and techniques for crafting tools. To forget was to risk more than embarrassment. It was to risk extinction. Memory was the external hard drive of the species, and every individual was a crucial node in the network. The act of remembering was a continuous, active, and deeply social process. Stories were repeated, rituals were performed, and knowledge was passed down through generations not via texts, but through the vibrant, imperfect, and deeply personal medium of human recollection. The brain, in that environment, was optimized for storing vast quantities of practical, survival-critical information. It was a library with no catalog, where every book had to be instantly accessible. Then came the great outsourcing. The invention of writing was the first and most profound revolution. It allowed memory to escape the fragile confines of the human brain and take a tangible form on clay tablets, papyrus scrolls, and eventually printed books. This was the birth of what we might call external memory. No longer did one need to remember every detail. One simply needed to remember where to find it. This trend has accelerated at a breathtaking pace. Today, our external memory is vast, instantaneous, and global. Our smartphones hold our contacts, our calendars, our photographs. The internet acts as a collective cerebral cortex for humanity, storing everything from the mundane to the monumental. We have delegated the task of rote memorization to our devices. This is not forgetting. It is a strategic reallocation of cognitive resources. We have not become amnesiacs. We have become librarians, skilled not in holding every piece of information in our heads, but in knowing how to efficiently retrieve it from the vast archives we have built. Is this a form of cognitive evolution? A seamless integration of biology and technology? This leads us to the present, to the deluge of the information age. Our brains are now faced with a challenge opposite to that of our ancestors. Not a scarcity of information, but a paralyzing abundance. In this new environment, the brain's strategy has shifted from hoarding to filtering. It has become an efficient and sometimes ruthless curator. It prioritizes. It remembers patterns, meanings, and emotional salience, the gist of an experience, the punchline of a joke, the feeling of a moment, while discarding the easily retrievable details. Why remember the exact date of a meeting when your calendar will remind you? Why memorize a recipe when a video guide is a click away? This is not a sign of cognitive laziness. It is an elegant adaptation. The brain is conserving its precious energy for higher-order tasks, for synthesis, for creativity, for problem-solving. It is learning to navigate a world where information is cheap, but attention and insight are the true currencies. Could it be that by forgetting the trivial, we are making room to understand the profound? Yet, a critical counter-argument whispers from the shadows of this convenient arrangement. This reliance on external memory carries a subtle tax. When we cease to exercise a muscle, it atrophies. Is the same true for our neural pathways? The act of remembering is not a passive retrieval. It is an active process of reconstruction that strengthens the connections between our neurons. By outsourcing this work, do we risk weakening our innate ability to focus, to memorize deeply, and to form rich, detailed memories that are woven into the fabric of our being? There is a difference between knowing a fact and knowing it, between having information on a screen and having it integrated into your understanding of the world. Furthermore, when our personal histories are stored primarily in a digital cloud, in timelines and photo albums curated by algorithms, do we risk losing a sense of authentic internal narrative? Our memories shape our identity. If those memories are primarily externalized, are we living a life that is truly ours, or are we assembling a biography from digital fragments? This is the central tension of our cognitive age. Where, precisely, is the line between intelligent adaptation, the wise offloading of mental clutter, and a fundamental laziness of the spirit, a quiet surrender of our inner world to the convenience of the machine? Perhaps the answer does not lie in the quantity of what we remember, but in its quality. The real question may not be how much we remember, but what kind of memories we cultivate and how true they feel. A life is not measured by the gigabytes of data it accumulates, but by the coherence and meaning of its narrative. If our internal memory is now freed from the tyranny of rote detail, what is its new purpose? Is it to become a chamber for deeper reflection, for connecting disparate ideas into wisdom? The boundary between intelligent evolution and cognitive decline may be drawn not by the number of phone numbers we can recall, but by the integrity and utility of the memories we choose to keep for ourselves. So we are left not with a conclusion, but with a more nuanced inquiry. If our memory is indeed transforming, shifting from a detailed ledger to a curator of meaning, What then becomes of a past that is useful, but may not be entirely accurate? We cling to the idea that memory is a faithful recorder, a camera that captures events with impartial precision. We are troubled when we remember an event differently from a friend, or when a childhood story, retold by a parent, reveals details we had forgotten or altered. We see these discrepancies as failures, glitches in our mental software. But what if this inaccuracy is not a bug, but a feature? What if the very usefulness of memory depends on its flexibility, on its willingness to edit the past in service of the present? You tell the story of your holiday in Dalat with the vivid certainty of a photograph. The scent of pine needles after a rain, the exact shade of the hydrangeas bordering the path, the warmth of the coffee cup in your hands as you watch the mist roll over the valley. The memory is a film you can replay, scene by scene, and you feel its truth in your bones. Then, one day, a friend shows you an actual photograph from that trip. The hydrangeas were pink, not blue. You weren't even on that path that day. You'd taken a different route. The coffee was tea. A cold unease settles in. If this memory, so real, so foundational to your sense of that time, is a fiction, what else have you misremembered? The unsettling truth is that your memory is not a faithful archivist. It is something far more strange and creative. A storyteller, an editor, a sculptor who constantly reshapes the clay of the past. Why would such an unreliable system be the very bedrock of our identity? Memory is not a recording. It is a reconstruction. This is the first and most fundamental layer of understanding, rooted not in philosophy, but in the wet, cellular reality of our brains. When an experience happens, it does not imprint itself perfectly onto a blank slate. Instead, it is broken down into its constituent parts: the sight of the flowers, the smell of the pines, the feeling of contentment, and these fragments are stored in different neural neighborhoods across the brain. To remember is not to retrieve a complete file, but to launch a frantic internal archaeological dig. Your brain's hippocampus acts as a foreman, sending signals to these disparate regions, demanding they send their pieces of the past back to the central workshop of your consciousness. And here is where the magic and the error begins. Each time you reassemble the memory, you are not simply putting together old pieces. You are working with materials that have been subtly altered by the passage of time, by everything you have learned and felt since the original event. The process is less like opening a saved document and more like telling a campfire story you've told 100 times before. Each telling smooths a rough edge, emphasizes a dramatic moment, and incorporates details from other stories you've heard around the fire. The brain, in its quest for a coherent narrative, will seamlessly fill in gaps with logical assumptions or even outright fabrications, all without your conscious knowledge. You remember walking through blue hydrangeas because, in the grand story of your life, it makes poetic sense. The memory of that holiday has become intertwined with a postcard you saw later, or a general association of Dalat with cool blue tones. This constant rewriting is not a design flaw. It is a feature. It allows your sense of self to remain fluid and adaptable. If every memory were a perfect, unchangeable record, your past would be a rigid, unforgiving script, full of contradictions and pain that could never be softened by the perspective of time. Is the primary purpose of memory, then, not accuracy, but the maintenance of a continuous, emotionally manageable sense of self? This creative editing is not unique to the individual. It is the very engine of culture. Before the written word, human knowledge and identity were carried in the vessel of oral history. A tribe's story of its origin, its heroes, its moral codes, was not passed down like a sacred, immutable text. It was a living thing, shaped by the voice of each storyteller. With every generation, the story was seasoned, as the Vietnamese saying goes. Details were amplified for dramatic effect. Characters were simplified into archetypes, and lessons were sharpened to be more memorable and impactful. The historical truth of the event was secondary to its utility. A story that forged a stronger group identity, that instilled necessary values like bravery or loyalty, was a successful story, regardless of its factual precision. These collective memories, These shared fictions became the glue that held communities together, creating a common past that justified a common present and inspired a common future. They were not lies. They were tools for survival on a societal scale. The myth is often more real than the fact, because it is the myth that people live by. So, if our ancestors built their world on stories that were true in spirit, if not in letter, are we so different? In our modern lives, this same mechanism operates as a subtle, internal psychologist. Consider the memory of a first love, often recalled with a poetic, aching beauty that the raw, confusing emotions of the time could never have possessed. The petty arguments, the insecurities, the mundane afternoons, these are sanded away by the gentle abrasion of time. What remains is a polished gem of feeling, a story of passion and loss that fits neatly into the narrative arc of your life. Similarly, you likely remember your past accomplishments as being slightly more impressive than they were, and your failures as being less catastrophic. This is not conscious deception. It is the brain's act of self-protection. By curating a past that portrays you as a competent, learning, and ultimately worthwhile individual, your memory provides the psychological fuel needed to face the present. It preserves your ego, your motivation, your will to push forward. A perfectly accurate memory, one that forced you to relive every humiliation and mistake with original intensity, would be a paralyzing burden. Is the gentle distortion of the past, then, a necessary kindness we perform for ourselves, a vital form of emotional homeostasis? Yet, a shadow of a doubt remains. If our memories are so malleable, so prone to serving our current needs rather than documenting past realities, how can we ever know what truly happened? This is not an abstract concern. The legal system relies on eyewitness testimony, yet decades of research have shown how fragile and susceptible to suggestion such memories can be. Our personal relationships can be poisoned by conflicting recollections of a shared event, each person utterly convinced of their own version. If we make major life decisions based on a past that is, in part, a carefully edited fiction, are we not building our future on unstable ground? The potential for error is immense. A decision made from a memory warped by resentment can lead to unnecessary conflict. A choice based on an inflated memory of success can set us up for a painful fall. The very system that protects us can also delude us. Where, then, do we draw the line between a useful narrative and a dangerous delusion? The inaccuracy of memory is not a bug in the human system. It appears to be a feature deeply woven into our biological and psychological fabric. Its distortions are not necessarily malevolent. They can be the source of cultural cohesion, personal resilience, and the very continuity of our identity. The problem may not be that our memories are imperfect, but in our expectation that they should be perfect archives. The question shifts from how do we make our memories more accurate to a more nuanced inquiry. When do we need to interrogate our past, to seek out the corroborating evidence, the photographs, the journals, the accounts of others, to correct a narrative that may be leading us astray? And when is it wiser, more humane, to allow the kind lie of memory to stand, to accept that the story we tell ourselves, however imperfect, is the one that allows us to get out of bed in the morning and face the day? Perhaps the value of a memory lies not in its fidelity to the event, but in its utility for the present moment. But if our past is a story we constantly rewrite to suit our present needs, then who is the true author of our lives? This constant, energy-intensive process of remembering and reconstructing raises a deeper, more fundamental question about our very design. If the brain goes to such elaborate lengths to edit and simplify the past, could the ultimate reason be not just psychological comfort, but something far more basic, sheer survival? After all, the brain is an organ of staggering metabolic greed, consuming up to a fifth of the body's energy while accounting for only 2% of its mass. Every recollection is a costly firework of neural activity. In such a demanding system, efficiency is not a luxury, it is an imperative. What if the imperfections of memory are not a flaw, but the signature of a profoundly efficient machine, one that has learned to conserve its most precious resource by remembering only what is essential and letting the rest fade into a useful, energy-saving blur? The human body is a study in economic distribution. The heart, that tireless piston, beats over 2 billion times in a lifetime. The lungs inflate and deflate, a constant rhythmic exchange with the atmosphere. The muscles, when called upon, can summon astonishing power. Yet, for all their work, none are the body's primary energy consumer. That title belongs to an organ of remarkable modesty and size, a mere 2% of our body weight, a wrinkled mass of tissue cradled in the skull. The brain, in its silent, ceaseless computation, claims a staggering 20% of our daily energy budget. This is a metabolic extravagance, a biological paradox. Why would evolution design a system so voracious? And what compromises must such a system make to balance its books? Perhaps the most intimate of these compromises is one we experience daily: the gentle, inexorable tide of forgetting. The name that escapes us, the misplaced keys, the vague outline of a conversation whose details have faded like old ink. Could it be that these small losses are not failures, but rather the essential cost of doing business? That our minds, in their wisdom, are simply conserving fuel. This begins not with a feeling, but with a fundamental biological reality. The brain is an organ operating under severe resource constraints. Every thought, every memory, every flicker of attention has a tangible metabolic price. Deep within the temporal lobes, the hippocampus acts as a diligent scribe, its neurons firing in intricate patterns to encode new experiences. Just behind our foreheads, the prefrontal cortex serves as the executive, the curator, sifting through this incoming flood of data. Together, they perform a constant and ruthless triage. Is this sensation, the specific warmth of the afternoon sun on your skin, critical for survival? Is this fact, the capital of a distant country, likely to be needed again? The brain makes these calculations in an instant, prioritizing information that aids in decision-making, in navigating social complexities, in avoiding danger. The rest, the beautiful, mundane clutter of daily life, is often marked for deletion. This is not a flaw, but a feature. It is a strategic allocation of limited power, a way to keep the system running smoothly without overloading its circuits. The brain, in its elegant efficiency, chooses to be a master strategist rather than a mere pack rat. It forgoes the photograph in favor of the map. But what kind of map did our ancestors need to draw? To understand this, we must step back from the humming, data-saturated present and into the quiet, perilous world of our prehistoric past. For them, energy was not just a metabolic concept. It was the difference between life and death. Every calorie had to be earned through foraging, hunting, and gathering. A brain that demanded excessive fuel without a clear survival return was a liability. Imagine a hominid on the savannah. The wind shifts, carrying a scent. A branch cracks in the distance. To survive, this individual cannot afford to be lost in the recollection of every leaf pattern seen that morning or the exact phrasing of a warning call from days past. The brain needed to be fast, not exhaustive. It evolved to remember not the discrete details but the patterns embedded within them. The specific shape of a predator's track was less important than the pattern of its movement, the time of day it hunted, the sound of its growl. This is a memory of essence, not of inventory. Our ancestors did not keep a diary of their days. They compiled a living, breathing guide to the world, a strategic ledger of threats and opportunities. Their memories were tools, honed by necessity, and forgetting was the whetstone that kept them sharp. The clutter of irrelevant detail was a luxury they could not afford. Is our modern experience of forgetting, then, simply an ancient, hard-wired legacy struggling to cope with a new world? That ancient filtering system is now confronted by a reality its designers could never have imagined. We live in an age of informational deluge. Hundreds of emails, social media notifications, news alerts, and advertisements bombard our senses each day. It is a fire hose of data pointed directly at a brain calibrated for a trickle. In this context, forgetting is no longer just an energy-saving measure. It is a vital defense mechanism against cognitive overload. Our modern brains perform the same triage as our ancestors, but the criteria have shifted. The prefrontal cortex, that overworked executive, now makes split-second judgments on a different set of priorities. Information that is not emotionally charged, that does not repeat, or that poses no immediate threat to our social or professional standing is often deemed expendable. It is filtered out, discarded like digital spam to prevent a catastrophic system crash. We forget the plot of a movie we saw last month to make room for the details of a new project. We forget a casual acquaintance's name to preserve the mental space for a loved one's birthday. This constant curation is the price of staying sane in a world of infinite stimuli. But what of those for whom this filter seems to malfunction? There exists a fascinating and often burdensome exception to this rule. Some individuals possess what is known as highly superior autobiographical memory, HSM. They can recall with uncanny accuracy the day of the week for any given date and the mundane details of their lives on that day. For them, the past is not a hazy landscape, but a high-definition film, readily accessible. On the surface, this seems like a superpower. But is it? The brain of someone with HSM does not appear to be structurally vastly different. It seems their neural gatekeepers are simply less stringent. The metabolic cost, however, must be extraordinary. One wonders if this constant, vivid recollection comes at the expense of other cognitive functions or if it carries an emotional toll, making it difficult to let go of past pains and slights. Their experience poses a provocative counterpoint. Is our typical forgetting not a limitation, but a protection? A way to economize not just on glucose, but on psychic energy as well. If remembering everything is a metabolic extravagance, could it also be an emotional one? This leads us to a deeper, more unsettling frontier of memory. The brain's curation is not always a gentle, metabolic housekeeping. Sometimes it is an act of brutal, self-preserving surgery. For individuals who have endured profound psychological trauma, the memory system can enact a far more drastic form of energy conservation. Entire periods of time can become inaccessible, sealed behind a mental barrier as solid as bone. The hippocampus and amygdala, overwhelmed by the stress hormones flooding the system during a traumatic event, can fail to encode the memory in a coherent narrative form. Instead, it is stored as fragmented sensory shards, a smell, a sound, a blinding flash of fear, disconnected from time and context. Or in some cases, the mind seems to sever access to the memory altogether, burying it in the deepest recesses of the unconscious. This is forgetting not as efficiency, but as survival. The energy required to integrate such a horrific event into the conscious self, to carry its full weight every day, might be too great for the psyche to bear. So, the mind makes a cruel choice. It sacrifices the continuity of the past to protect the viability of the present. It is a desperate, energy-saving measure of the most profound order. But in this protective amnesia, what else is lost? The very details that could lead to understanding, to healing. The brain, in its fierce commitment to keeping the organism functioning, may safeguard us from the immediate shock of a memory. But does it, in doing so, quietly mortgage our future peace? Is the ultimate price of this particular energy savings a piece of the soul itself?